Welcome to a gentle journey through the golden corridors of Versailles, where we'll drift through centuries of royal splendor and human drama. Tonight, we're exploring the rise and fall of the Bourbon Dynasty, France's last great royal house whose story spans nearly 300 years of absolute power, revolution, and ultimate collapse. Whether you're settling in for sleep or simply seeking a peaceful escape into history, I'm grateful you've chosen to join me on this soothing voyage through time. The year is 1589, and France bleeds from decades of religious warfare that have torn the kingdom apart. In the smoky corridors of the Château de Saint-Germain-en-Laye, a Protestant prince named Henri of Navarre paces nervously across worn stone floors, knowing that his destiny hangs by the thinnest of threads. The dying king Henri III has just named him heir to the French throne, but half the kingdom would rather see France burn than accept a Huguenot king. Henri's mourning begins before dawn, as it has for months during this endless campaign. His valet quietly enters the modest chamber where the future king sleeps on a simple military cot, far removed from the silk-draped beds of Versailles that his descendants would one day call home. The room smells of leather and parchment, filled with maps of France marked with the territories loyal to him and those still in rebellion. A single candle flickers on a wooden table, casting dancing shadows across documents that could determine the fate of millions. As Henri rises and dresses in the plain doublet of a soldier rather than royal robes, he understands that becoming King of France will require more than birthright or battlefield victories. It will demand the greatest sacrifice any monarch has ever made, the abandonment of his Protestant faith for the Catholic beliefs of his subjects. The morning light filtering through narrow windows illuminates a man caught between personal conviction and political necessity, preparing to make the choice that will establish the most powerful dynasty in European history. The servants who attend Henri move with quiet efficiency, bringing him simple bread and watered wine for breakfast, rather than the elaborate feasts that future Bourbon kings will enjoy. These men have followed him through years of civil war, sleeping in fields and abandoned chateaux, always one step ahead of Catholic League assassins who view Henri as a heretical usurper. Their loyalty stems not from ceremonial obligation, but from genuine respect for a leader who shares their hardships and fights beside them in battle. Henri's correspondence arrives with the morning meal, carried by exhausted messengers who have ridden through the night to bring news from across his fractured kingdom. Each letter reveals the delicate balance he must maintain between competing factions, foreign powers, and religious authorities who question his right to rule. He reads reports from English agents offering military support, Spanish diplomats threatening intervention, and French nobles calculating whether to support his cause or join his enemies. The transformation of Henri of Navarre into Henri IV of France unfolds gradually through the autumn of 1593 as he prepares for the most momentous decision in Bourbon history. His daily routine becomes a careful choreography of political maneuvering and personal reflection, conducted in the shadow of Saint-Denis Basilica, where French kings have been crowned for centuries. The ancient stones seem to whisper the names of his predecessors, Capetians and Valois rulers, whose blood does not flow in his veins, but whose crown he is destined to inherit. On the morning of July 25th, 1593, Henri wakes knowing that this day will either secure his throne or destroy his hopes forever. His chambers in Saint-Denis are spartanly furnished, reflecting the uncertainty that still surrounds his reign. The only luxury is a small silver crucifix that rests on his bedside table, a symbol of the faith he is about to embrace for the salvation of France. His breakfast consists of bread blessed by Catholic priests, a deliberate gesture of reconciliation that his Protestant supporters view with barely concealed anguish. The ceremony of Henri's conversion takes place in the magnificent Gothic cathedral of Saint-Denis, where the morning light streams through stained glass windows to illuminate the altar where French kings have knelt for generations. Henri approaches wearing simple white robes rather than royal regalia, emphasizing his humility before God and his subjects. The Archbishop of Bourges waits with the sacred oils and ancient rituals that will transform a Huguenot prince into a Catholic king, completing the religious requirements for legitimate rule over France. As Henri kneels before the altar, the weight of his decision settles upon him like a physical burden. The words of renunciation he speaks echo through the cathedral, formally abandoning the Protestant faith that has shaped his entire life in exchange for the crown that will make him master of Europe's most powerful kingdom. His voice remains steady as he recites the Catholic creed, though witnesses later describe seeing tears on his cheeks as he completes the transformation that will establish the Bourbon Dynasty. The immediate aftermath of Henri's conversion transforms the political landscape of France with remarkable speed. Within weeks, cities that have resisted his authority begin opening their gates to royal armies, and nobles who have fought against him for years arrive at court seeking reconciliation and positions in his government. The daily routine of kingship begins to replace the nomadic existence of a Protestant pretender, as Henri establishes residence in the Louvre Palace and begins the complex process of rebuilding a kingdom devastated by civil war. Henri's first months as an acknowledged Catholic king unfold in a whirlwind of administrative activity and ceremonial obligations that would have been impossible during his years as a contested claimant. His mornings begin with meetings in the royal council chamber, where ministers brief him on the enormous challenges facing France. Tax revenues have collapsed during the religious wars, leaving the royal treasury virtually empty. Foreign armies still occupy French territory in the north and east. The economy has been shattered by years of warfare, and thousands of refugees require assistance and resettlement. The daily schedule that emerges reflects Henri's hands-on approach to kingship and his determination to restore France's greatness through personal engagement rather than ceremonial distance. Unlike previous French kings who governed through elaborate court rituals, Henri IV conducts business in relatively informal settings, meeting directly with merchants, farmers, and artisans to understand the practical challenges facing his subjects. His lunch table becomes an extension of his council chamber, where policy discussions continue over simple meals shared with advisors, diplomats, and visiting officials. Henri's afternoon routine includes regular inspections of royal fortifications and military installations around Paris, reflecting his understanding that the Bourbon dynasty's survival depends on maintaining strong defences against both foreign invasion and domestic rebellion. He travels on horseback through the narrow streets of the capital, stopping to speak with citizens and observe conditions in markets, workshops, and residential districts. These informal progresses allow him to gauge public opinion and identify problems before they become serious threats to royal authority. The reconstruction of France under Henri IV requires not just political reconciliation, but economic innovation that will restore prosperity to a kingdom impoverished by decades of warfare. Henri's evening hours are spent reviewing detailed reports from provincial administrators about agricultural production, manufacturing capabilities, and commercial opportunities that could generate new sources of royal revenue. He works by candlelight in his private study, surrounded by maps and account books that document the enormous task of rebuilding French power from its foundations. The Edict of Nantes, promulgated in 1598, represents the culmination of Henri's efforts to establish lasting religious peace in France while securing the Bourbon dynasty's legitimacy. The months of preparation leading to this historic decree reveal the careful balance Henri must maintain between Catholic and Protestant interests, ensuring that neither faction gains advantages that could destabilize his reign. His daily schedule during this period includes separate meetings with religious leaders from both communities as he crafts compromise language that will satisfy competing demands for religious freedom and Catholic supremacy. Henri's personal life during these formative years of Bourbon rule reflects the same pragmatic approach that characterizes his public policies. His marriage to Marguerite of Valois remains unconsummated and increasingly irrelevant to his political needs, while his relationship with Gabrielle d'Estrées provides both emotional satisfaction and potential dynastic complications. The delicate management of these romantic entanglements requires Henri to balance personal happiness with royal obligations, a challenge that will face every Bourbon monarch who follows him. The daily rhythm of life at Henri's court gradually evolves from the military efficiency of wartime headquarters into something resembling the elaborate ceremonial structures that will characterize Versailles under his successors. However, Henri's personal preferences for informality and accessibility create a distinctly different atmosphere from the rigid protocols that will later define Bourbon kingship. Courtiers find themselves expected to contribute meaningfully to government business rather than simply performing decorative functions, establishing patterns of royal service that emphasize competence over ceremony. As the 16th century draws to a close, Henri IV has successfully established the Bourbon dynasty as the legitimate rulers of France, but the greatest challenges to his reign still lie ahead. The daily routine of kingship has evolved into a complex balance of administrative duties, military responsibilities, and diplomatic negotiations that will define the Bourbon approach to absolute monarchy for generations to come. The winter of 1600 brings new challenges to Henri's court as he navigates the treacherous waters of European diplomacy while struggling with personal decisions that could reshape the Bourbon succession. His mornings now begin in the grand chambers of the Louvre, where servants light fires in massive stone hearths before dawn to chase away the bitter cold that seeps through ancient walls. The king rises to find his writing desk already prepared with fresh ink and parchment, ready for the endless correspondence that maintains France's delicate position between the competing powers of Spain, England, and the Holy Roman Empire. Henri's breakfast routine has evolved into a semi-formal ceremony, attended by selected courtiers and foreign ambassadors who seek private audiences before the day's official business begins. The royal table groans under platters of fresh bread, preserved fruits, and wine from the royal vineyards, a marked contrast to the military rations of his campaigning years. Yet Henri maintains his preference for simple fare, often sharing his meal with visitors, while discussing matters of state in the relaxed atmosphere he cultivates to encourage honest counsel. The morning council meetings reveal the growing complexity of governing a reunified France as Henri balances the competing demands of regional nobles, religious authorities, and foreign allies. His advisors arrive bearing thick portfolios of documents requiring royal attention, from trade agreements with Italian city-states to military treaties with Protestant German princes. The king's study becomes a nerve center of European politics, where decisions made over morning coffee can influence the balance of power across the continent. Henri's relationship with Gabrielle d'Estrées reaches its most complex phase during this period, as political necessity demands he consider remarriage to secure the dynasty's future, while his heart remains devoted to his mistress. The delicate negotiations surrounding a potential union with Marie de' Medici unfold through secret diplomatic channels, conducted in hushed conversations in palace antechambers, while Gabrielle maintains her position as the unofficial queen of Henri's affections. The emotional strain of separating personal desire from royal duty weighs heavily on the king, visible to courtiers who notice his increasingly solitary evening walks through the Louvre gardens. The daily management of France's reconstruction requires Henri to master details ranging from canal construction projects to monetary policy reforms that will restore confidence in royal currency. His afternoon schedules include meetings with engineers planning new fortifications, merchants seeking trading privileges, and scholars working to establish new universities in provincial cities. The king's remarkable memory for names and faces allows him to maintain personal relationships with hundreds of officials throughout the kingdom, creating networks of loyalty that strengthen Bourbon authority at every level of government. Henri's evening routine often extends well past midnight as he reviews reports from provincial intendants about tax collection, agricultural yields, and local security conditions. His private apartments become a workshop where the future shape of France emerges through careful planning and constant adjustment of policies to meet changing circumstances. The candlelit hours spent poring over maps and financial statements represent the unglamorous foundation work that enables the Bourbon dynasty to transform from usurpers into legitimate rulers of Europe's most powerful kingdom. The assassination of Gabriel d'Estrées in April 1599 devastates Henri personally while creating new political opportunities for securing the dynasty's future through strategic marriage. The king's grief manifests in dramatic changes to his daily routine as he withdraws from public ceremonies and spends long hours in prayer at the chapel of Saint-Denis. His servants report finding him standing motionless before portraits of his lost love, struggling to balance personal mourning with the relentless demands of kingship that allow no pause for private sorrow. But the negotiations for Henri's marriage to Marie de Medici intensify throughout 1600, conducted through elaborate diplomatic protocols that reflect the international significance of the union. Henri's days become consumed with discussions about dowry arrangements, territorial concessions, and religious ceremonies that will satisfy both French and Italian requirements for a valid royal marriage. The king's personal preferences matter little in these calculations, as every aspect of the wedding must serve broader political objectives of strengthening French ties to Italian banking houses and papal authority. The arrival of Marie de Medici in France transforms the atmosphere of Henri's court as Italian customs and ceremonial practices blend with French traditions to create new patterns of royal life. The young queen brings with her artists, musicians, and scholars who introduce Renaissance culture to a court still recovering from the austerity of Civil War years. Henri adapts his daily routine to accommodate his new wife's preferences for elaborate ceremonies and artistic patronage, though he maintains his essential habits of direct engagement with governmental business. The birth of the future. Louis XIII in September. 1601 provides the Bourbon dynasty with its first legitimate heir, ensuring dynastic continuity while creating new responsibilities for Henri as both king and father. His daily schedule expands to include regular visits to the royal nursery, where he observes his son's development with the careful attention of a monarch who understands that France's future depends on properly preparing the next generation for the burdens of absolute rule. The king's genuine affection for children becomes evident to courtiers who witness his transformation from stern ruler to doting parent during these private family moments. Henri's approach to raising his son reflects his own experiences, learning kingship through warfare and political crisis, leading him to design educational programs that combine traditional royal training with practical governance skills. The young Dauphin's daily routine includes lessons in languages, mathematics, and classical literature, but also direct observation of royal council meetings and informal conversations with ministers about policy implementation. Henri's determination to spare his son the chaos that marked his own path to the throne shapes every aspect of the prince's education. The establishment of royal workshops and manufactories throughout France represents Henri's vision of economic development that will make the kingdom independent of foreign imports, while providing employment for urban populations. His frequent inspections of these facilities reveal his hands-on approach to economic policy, as he examines silk production techniques, discusses quality control with master craftsmen, and reviews financial projections with factory managers. These visits, often conducted without advance notice, allow Henri to assess the real effectiveness of his policies, rather than relying solely on official reports. The king's relationship with his chief minister, the Duke of Sully, develops into one of the most effective partnerships in French administrative history, based on complementary skills and shared commitment to national reconstruction. Their daily working sessions combine Henri's intuitive political judgment with Sully's methodical approach to financial management, creating policies that balance immediate needs with long-term strategic objectives. The trust between monarch and minister allows for frank discussions about policy failures and necessary corrections, establishing precedents for royal administration that future Bourbon kings will struggle to match. Henri's foreign policy during these years requires constant attention to shifting alliances and emerging threats that could destabilize France's hard-won unity. His correspondence with European rulers fills entire filing cabinets in the royal archives, documenting the complex web of negotiations necessary to maintain French independence while avoiding costly military conflicts. The king's personal diplomacy, conducted through letters written in his own hand and private meetings with foreign ambassadors, creates relationships that serve French interests more effectively than formal treaty negotiations. The daily routine of court life gradually becomes more elaborate as Henri's reign stabilizes and French prosperity returns, yet the king maintains his preference for accessibility and informal communication with subjects from all social classes. His morning walks through Paris streets, conducted with minimal security, allow him to observe conditions firsthand and hear complaints directly from citizens who would never gain access to formal court ceremonies. These progresses reinforce Henri's reputation as the father of his people, while providing valuable intelligence about public opinion and emerging problems. The question of religious tolerance continues to challenge Henri's administration as Catholic and Protestant communities test the boundaries of the Edict of Nantes through local conflicts and competing interpretations of royal policy. His daily routine includes regular meetings with religious leaders from both communities, where he employs his considerable diplomatic skills to prevent minor disputes from escalating into broader sectarian violence. The king's personal example of religious moderation influences court culture, though underlying tensions remain that will eventually threaten the stability his successors inherit. As the new century progresses, Henri IV has successfully transformed himself from a Protestant pretender into the legitimate Catholic king of France, establishing the Bourbon dynasty on foundations that will endure for over 2 centuries. His daily routine reflects the evolution from warrior king to paternal monarch, balancing the competing demands of domestic reconstruction, foreign diplomacy, and dynastic succession that defines successful absolute monarchy. The patterns of governance he establishes during these crucial years create precedents that will guide and constrain every Bourbon ruler who follows, setting the stage for both the magnificent achievements and ultimate catastrophe that await this remarkable royal house. The assassination attempt that shattered Henri IV's sense of security came on a crisp December morning in 1594, when Jean Chatel's dagger missed the king's throat by mere inches during a reception at the Louvre. The young fanatic's blade instead caught Henri's lip, drawing blood that stained his white collar as courtiers tackled the would-be assassin to the marble floor. This moment transforms Henri's understanding of kingship, revealing that even a legitimate Catholic monarch faces mortal danger from extremists who view any compromise as betrayal of divine will. Henri's recovery from the attack unfolds in the royal chambers where physicians tend his wound, while ministers debate enhanced security measures that will forever change the intimate accessibility that has characterized his reign. The king insists on maintaining his daily routines despite the protests of advisors who urge him to govern from behind palace walls rather than walking among his subjects. His morning shave becomes a tense ritual as the royal barber's hands tremble while drawing the razor across the scarred lip that serves as a permanent reminder of mortality's constant presence. The investigation into Chatel's motives reveals connections to Jesuit colleges where radical theology justifies regicide against heretical rulers, forcing Henri to navigate between his desire for religious tolerance and the political necessity of suppressing seditious teachings. His afternoon meetings with judicial officials become exercises in measured justice, as he seeks to punish conspiracy without triggering broader persecution of Catholic institutions that support his legitimacy. The delicate balance between security and reconciliation requires Henri to demonstrate strength while avoiding the appearance of tyranny that could alienate moderate Catholics. The daily correspondence that flows across Henri's desk during this period reflects the international dimensions of domestic threats as Spanish agents and papal nuncios monitor French religious policies for signs of weakness or deviation from Catholic orthodoxy. His evening hours are consumed with drafting responses to foreign courts that must simultaneously reassure Catholic allies and maintain independence from external interference in French affairs. The king's private study becomes a diplomatic battlefield where words must serve as weapons to defend national sovereignty without provoking military intervention. Henri's relationship with the Parlement of Paris grows increasingly complex as magistrates demand stronger measures against Protestant communities, while the king seeks to preserve the religious balance that maintains domestic peace. His weekly audiences with parliamentary delegations become exercises in royal authority, where Henri must assert monarchical supremacy over judicial pretensions, while respecting legal traditions that legitimize his rule. The ancient halls of the Palais de Justice echo with debates about the limits of royal power and the rights of traditional institutions to constrain royal will. The reconstruction of Paris emerges as Henri's most visible legacy project, transforming a medieval city scarred by religious warfare into a modern capital worthy of Europe's most powerful monarchy. His morning rides through construction sites reveal the king's personal involvement in urban planning, as he consults with architects about the placement of new squares and bridges that will facilitate commerce while providing military advantages. The king's vision extends beyond mere functionality to encompass aesthetic grandeur that will inspire loyalty and awe among subjects and foreign visitors alike. The Place Royale, later known as Place des Vosges, represents Henri's revolutionary approach to urban design, creating France's first planned residential square, where noble families will live according to architectural harmony rather than feudal hierarchy. His frequent inspections of the construction progress reveal his attention to details ranging from the height of arcades to the color of roof tiles, ensuring that every element contributes to the overall effect of ordered beauty. The king's personal involvement in selecting tenants for the completed houses demonstrates his understanding that successful urban planning requires social as well as architectural coordination. Henri's economic policies during this period focus on developing French manufacturing capabilities that will reduce dependence on foreign imports while providing employment for urban populations displaced by decades of warfare. His afternoon visits to silk workshops and tapestry factories become informal seminars on industrial development, where he discusses production techniques with master craftsmen and reviews quality standards with guild officials. The king's genuine interest in manufacturing processes reflects his practical understanding that royal power ultimately depends on economic prosperity rather than ceremonial magnificence. The establishment of new trading companies under royal patronage represents Henri's vision of French commercial expansion that will compete with Dutch and English merchants in global markets. His evening meetings with merchant investors combine discussions of profit margins with strategic planning for colonial ventures that could secure raw materials and new markets for French products. The king's study fills with maps of Africa, Asia, and the Americas as he contemplates territorial acquisitions that will strengthen France's position in an increasingly competitive international economy. Henri's personal life during these middle years of his reign reflects the tension between royal duty and human desire that characterizes absolute monarchy throughout European history. His marriage to Marie de Medici provides the dynasty with additional heirs while creating domestic complications that require careful management to preserve both marital harmony and political stability. The Queen's Italian background introduces new cultural influences to the French court, though her limited understanding of French politics sometimes creates diplomatic embarrassments that Henri must address through patient explanation and gentle correction. The king's relationship with his children reveals the softer aspects of his character that contrast sharply with his public image as a warrior monarch who achieved the throne through military conquest and religious compromise. His daily visits to the royal nursery become islands of domestic tranquility in schedules otherwise consumed with affairs of state as he plays with young Louis and observes the development of personality traits that will shape the future of the Bourbon dynasty. Henry's genuine affection for his children influences his approach to succession planning, as he seeks to prepare them for royal responsibilities without burdening their childhood with premature awareness of political complexities. The question of educating the Dauphin occupies increasing amounts of Henri's attention as Louis approaches school age and requires tutors capable of providing both classical learning and practical training in statecraft. The king's selection of instructors reflects his belief that effective monarchy requires comprehensive knowledge rather than narrow specialization, leading him to choose teachers who can combine literary scholarship with administrative experience. The daily lessons that unfold in the royal apartments become laboratories for testing educational theories that will influence noble education throughout France. Henri's approach to religious policy evolves during this period as he seeks to strengthen Catholic loyalty while maintaining Protestant support, a balancing act that requires constant adjustment to changing political circumstances. His weekly meetings with church officials become negotiations over the extent of royal authority in ecclesiastical affairs, as he asserts traditional Gallican freedoms while respecting papal primacy in spiritual matters. The king's personal devotions, conducted in the royal chapel each morning, serve both genuine religious needs and political demonstration of Catholic orthodoxy that reassures skeptical observers. The development of French military capabilities represents one of Henri's most significant contributions to Bourbon power, as he modernizes army organization and equipment to meet evolving strategic challenges. His regular inspections of fortifications and arsenals reveal his hands-on approach to defense planning, examining everything from cannon foundries to cavalry training grounds, with the expert eye of a commander who learned warfare through personal experience. The king's understanding that military strength ultimately guarantees political stability leads him to invest heavily in professional officer training and technological innovation that will serve France well in future conflicts. The diplomatic revolution that Henri orchestrates during these years gradually shifts European alliances away from religious divisions toward more pragmatic considerations of territorial and commercial advantage. His correspondence with Protestant German princes and Catholic Italian rulers demonstrates his skill at crafting agreements that serve French interests while respecting the legitimate concerns of potential allies. The king's private negotiations often override formal diplomatic protocols as he builds personal relationships with foreign leaders that transcend the religious antagonisms of previous generations. Henri's domestic policies during this period lay foundations for administrative efficiency that will enable France to mobilize resources more effectively than any contemporary European state. His reform of tax collection procedures reduces corruption while increasing royal revenues, providing funds necessary for military modernization and infrastructure development. The king's afternoon meetings with financial officials become planning sessions for long-term fiscal strategies that will support sustained French expansion throughout the 17th century. The cultural renaissance that emerges under Henri's patronage transforms French intellectual life as scholars, artists, and writers find generous support for projects that enhance royal prestige while advancing human knowledge. His evening salons attract leading minds from across Europe, creating an atmosphere of intellectual ferment that will influence French culture for generations. The king's personal participation in these gatherings reveals his genuine appreciation for learning and artistic achievement, though political considerations always inform his choices about which projects deserve royal support. As Henri IV approaches the height of his power and influence, the daily routines he has established reflect the successful transformation of the Bourbon dynasty from contested usurpers into legitimate rulers of Europe's most powerful kingdom. His morning councils shape continental politics. His afternoon progresses through Paris demonstrate the prosperity his policies have restored, and his evening studies prepare for challenges that will test French strength in the decades ahead. The patterns of absolute monarchy that Henry creates through personal example will guide his successors as they navigate the complexities of maintaining royal authority in an increasingly sophisticated political environment. The grand design of Henri IV's reign reaches its tragic crescendo on the afternoon of May 14th, 1610, when François Ravailla's knife pierces the royal heart on the Rue de la Ferronnerie. The king's mourning had begun like countless others, with servants lighting fires in the royal chambers and preparing correspondence that would never be answered. Henri's final breakfast consisted of bread and wine shared with courtiers who noticed his unusually somber mood, as if some premonition shadowed the man who had survived so many previous attempts on his life. The funeral cortege that winds through Paris streets reveals the genuine affection Henri had earned from subjects who remember the prosperity his reign brought after decades of civil war. Merchants close their shops, craftsmen abandon their workshops, and farmers journey from distant provinces to witness the passing of a king who had walked among them without ceremony or pretense. The elaborate ceremonies at Saint-Denis cannot disguise the political crisis that Henri's death creates, as the Bourbon dynasty suddenly depends on a 9-year-old boy to maintain the stability that his father had built through 21 years of careful governance. Young Louis XIII awakens on the morning after his father's assassination to find himself King of France, though the crown that rests on his small head weighs more than his frail shoulders can bear. The royal apartments that had echoed with Henri's booming laughter now fill with hushed conversations among ministers who understand that effective power has passed to Marie de Medici, whose Italian background and limited understanding of French politics threaten everything the first Bourbon king had accomplished. The Regency Council that assembles in the Louvre Palace reveals the fragility of royal authority when personal charisma cannot be inherited along with dynastic titles. Marie's morning audiences become exercises in managing competing factions rather than governing a unified kingdom, as nobles who had submitted to Henri's authority begin testing the limits of a foreign queen's power. The young king sits silently through these sessions, learning harsh lessons about the loneliness of absolute monarchy that his tutors had never included in their carefully planned curriculum. The daily routine that emerges during Louis XIII's minority reflects the complex balance of power between the Queen Mother, royal ministers, and ambitious nobles who see opportunity in the absence of strong royal leadership. Marie's breakfast meetings with her Italian advisors create resentment among French courtiers who find themselves excluded from decisions affecting their own country. The palazzo politics of Florence transplanted to Versailles generate conflicts that Henri IV had spent decades resolving through personal diplomacy and military strength. The education of Louis XIII unfolds in chambers where every lesson carries political implications, as competing factions seek to influence the young king's developing understanding of royal authority and noble obligations. His morning tutoring sessions with classical scholars alternate with afternoon meetings with military instructors who emphasize the warrior traditions that brought the Bourbon dynasty to power. The conflicting advice the boy receives reflects broader disagreements about whether France should pursue peaceful prosperity or military expansion in the years ahead. Marie de Medici's relationship with her son grows increasingly strained as Louis approaches adolescence and begins asserting independence that threatens her continued influence over royal policy. Their daily interactions become formal ceremonies rather than genuine family conversations, as the Queen Mother struggles to maintain control, while the young king seeks advisors who will support his growing determination to rule in his own right. The emotional distance that develops between mother and son mirrors the political divisions that weaken France during this crucial period. The emergence of Cardinal Richelieu as Louis XIII's chief minister represents the most significant development in Bourbon governance since Henri IV's conversion to Catholicism. The cardinal's morning consultations with the king gradually replace Marie's influence over policy decisions, as Louis discovers in Richelieu a mentor whose understanding of absolute monarchy matches his own ambitions for royal supremacy. Their working relationship, conducted in the cardinal's private study, creates the foundation for French dominance in European affairs that will characterize the remainder of the 17th century. Richelieu's daily routine reveals the methodical approach to power that transforms the Bourbon monarchy from a personal kingship dependent on individual charisma, into an institutional system capable of surviving weak rulers and political crises. His morning correspondence coordinates policies across multiple government departments, while his afternoon audiences with foreign ambassadors advance French interests through careful diplomatic maneuvering. The cardinal's evening meetings with intelligence agents create information networks that extend French influence throughout Europe, while protecting royal authority from domestic threats. The siege of La Rochelle in 1628 demonstrates the new effectiveness of royal administration under Richelieu's guidance, as French forces systematically reduce the last major Huguenot stronghold through careful planning, rather than costly frontal assaults. Louis XIII's daily presence at the siege reveals his growing confidence as a military commander, though observers note that major strategic decisions continue to require the cardinal's approval. The king's morning inspections of siege works and afternoon consultations with engineers show his genuine interest in military science, though political considerations always override purely tactical concerns. The victory at La Rochelle transforms Louis XIII's understanding of royal authority, as he witnesses the practical benefits of absolute monarchy applied through efficient administration rather than personal magnetism. His daily routine following the siege reflects new confidence in royal power, as he begins making independent decisions about appointments and policies that previously would have required extensive consultation with advisors. The king's morning councils become occasions for announcing royal will, rather than seeking consensus among competing factions. The construction of new royal residences during this period reveals Louis XIII's vision of monarchy that emphasizes ceremonial grandeur rather than the informal accessibility that characterized his father's reign. His afternoon visits to building sites at Versailles show particular attention to details of protocol and precedents that will govern court life in the expanding palace. The king's personal involvement in planning reception halls and private apartments demonstrates his understanding that effective absolute monarchy requires physical settings that reinforce royal supremacy through architectural magnificence. Louis XIII's marriage to Anne of Austria creates new diplomatic possibilities, while generating personal complications that influence both domestic politics and foreign relations. The daily interactions between king and queen reveal the emotional constraints imposed by dynastic obligations, as political necessities override personal compatibility in determining royal domestic arrangements. Their formal conversations, conducted according to Spanish court etiquette that Anne brings from her Habsburg upbringing, establish patterns of royal marriage that prioritize state interests over individual happiness. The long-awaited birth of the future Louis XIV in 1638 provides the Bourbon dynasty with a direct heir after 23 years of uncertainty about succession arrangements. The elaborate ceremonies surrounding the Dauphin's birth reflect the relief that greets the arrival of a prince whose existence ensures dynastic continuity. Louis XIII's daily visits to the royal nursery reveal the genuine affection he feels for his son, though court protocol limits the informal family interactions that might have developed under different circumstances. The education planned for the young Dauphin reflects lessons learned from Louis XIII's own troubled minority, as the king seeks to provide his son with training that will enable effective rule from the moment of accession. The daily schedule designed for the prince combines traditional royal education with innovative approaches to statecraft that emphasize practical administration over ceremonial functions. Louis XIII's personal involvement in selecting tutors reveals his determination to spare his son the political weakness that marked the early years of his own reign. The final years of Louis XIII's reign unfold in the shadow of the 30 Years' War, as France's intervention in European conflicts demonstrates the military capabilities that Richelieu's reforms have created. The king's daily briefings on military campaigns reveal his growing expertise in strategic planning, though poor health increasingly limits his ability to lead armies personally. His morning meetings with field commanders become exercises in long-distance command that test the administrative systems supporting French military power. The death of Cardinal Richelieu in 1642 removes the dominant personality who had shaped French policy for nearly 2 decades, forcing Louis XIII to assume direct responsibility for governing decisions that had previously been filtered through his chief minister's judgment. The king's daily routine expands to include direct consultation with department heads and foreign ambassadors, revealing both his administrative competence and the enormous burden that absolute monarchy places on individual rulers. His evening hours stretch past midnight as he attempts to master details of governance that Richelieu had previously handled with seemingly effortless efficiency. Louis XIII's own death in 1643 creates another regency crisis as the Bourbon dynasty once again depends on a child king to maintain royal authority established through decades of careful institution building. The elaborate funeral ceremonies at Saint-Denis cannot disguise the political challenges facing the 5-year-old Louis XIV, whose reign begins under the shadow of foreign war and domestic rebellion that will test every foundation of absolute monarchy. The morning when young Louis awakens to find himself King of France marks the beginning of the most magnificent and ultimately tragic chapter in Bourbon history. The regency of Anne of Austria unfolds according to patterns established during Louis XIII's minority, though the Queen Mother's Spanish Habsburg background creates different political dynamics than had characterized Marie de Medici's Italian influence. Her daily audiences with French ministers reveal the challenge of governing a kingdom whose interests often conflict with those of her native Spain, as the continuing war forces her to choose between dynastic loyalty and royal duty. The morning councils that shape French policy during this period reflect the complex balance between foreign influence and national independence that defines regency government. Cardinal Mazarin's emergence as the dominant figure in Louis XIV's early education represents continuity with Richelieu's administrative methods, while introducing new approaches to royal training that will shape the most absolute monarch in European history. His daily sessions with the young king combine lessons in classical literature with practical instruction in the mechanics of power, as Mazarin seeks to prepare Louis for the burdens of personal rule that await his majority. The cardinal's evening reports to Anne of Austria reveal the careful coordination required to maintain royal authority while preparing for the eventual transition to direct monarchical government. The Fronde rebellions that erupted during Louis XIV's minority expose the continuing tensions between royal authority and noble independence that Henry IV had temporarily resolved through personal charisma and political compromise. The young king's experience of fleeing Paris in the middle of a winter night creates lasting impressions about the dangers of limiting royal power that will influence his entire approach to absolute monarchy. His childhood memories of humiliation and uncertainty forge determination to prevent any future challenges to Bourbon's supremacy through the creation of governmental systems that make royal authority unchallengeable. The daily routine that emerges as Louis XIV approaches majority reflects lessons learned from previous regency crises, as careful attention to protocol and ceremony reinforces royal dignity, while practical administrative training prepares the king for effective governance. His morning tutorials with scholars and ministers alternate with afternoon military exercises that emphasize the warrior traditions of Bourbon kingship. The combination of intellectual sophistication and physical prowess that develops during these formative years creates the foundation for a reign that will transform both France and European civilization according to the vision of absolute monarchy, perfected through 3 generations of Bourbon rule. Generations of Bourbon rule. The young Louis XIV's mornings begin in chambers still echoing with the trauma of the Fronde, where servants move with exaggerated care around a king who learned distrust before he learned statecraft. At barely 10 years old, he rises to face a day structured by Cardinal Mazarin's meticulous planning, every hour designed to transform a frightened child into the embodiment of absolute royal authority. His breakfast arrives on golden plates that seem to mock the memory of nights spent fleeing rebellious nobles, while tutors wait in adjoining rooms with lessons that will reshape the very concept of kingship. The morning educational sessions reveal Mazarin's revolutionary approach to royal training, as classical instruction blends seamlessly with practical governance in ways that previous Bourbonnaires never experienced. Louis sits at an ornate desk studying Latin texts that explore the divine right of kings, while maps of European territories spread across nearby tables illustrate the territorial ambitions that will define his reign. His writing exercises include copying diplomatic correspondence in multiple languages, developing skills that will enable him to conduct international negotiations without dependence on translators or intermediaries. Cardinal Mazarin's personal involvement in the king's education extends far beyond ceremonial oversight, as he conducts afternoon seminars that combine philosophy with political realism in sessions that unfold like conversations between master and apprentice. Their discussions range from ancient Roman imperial administration to contemporary Spanish court protocols, creating intellectual foundations for innovations that will revolutionize European monarchy. The Cardinal's evening reviews of the King's progress reveal satisfaction with a student whose natural intelligence exceeds even optimistic expectations about his potential for greatness. The daily routine gradually incorporates ceremonial elements that prepare Louis for the theatrical aspects of absolute monarchy, as Mazarin understands that effective kingship requires mastery of symbolic representation as well as administrative competence. Morning dress rituals become elaborate ceremonies, attended by carefully selected courtiers who observe the young king's transformation from private individual into public embodiment of royal authority. The afternoon audiences with foreign ambassadors provide opportunities for Louis to practice the dignified reserve that will characterize his mature diplomatic style. Anne of Austria's relationship with her son evolves during this period, from maternal protection toward formal deference that reflects his approaching assumption of direct royal authority. Their daily interactions become training exercises in the emotional distance required for effective absolute monarchy, as personal affection must never compromise royal dignity or political judgment. The Queen Mother's gradual withdrawal from policy discussions creates space for Louis to develop independent decision-making capabilities while maintaining family harmony during the delicate transition period. The transformation of Versailles from modest hunting lodge into magnificent palace begins during these formative years, as Louis develops his vision of royal residence that will serve both practical administrative needs and symbolic demonstration of Bourbon supremacy. His weekly visits to construction sites reveal growing attention to architectural details that must convey messages about royal power to both French subjects and foreign observers. The king's personal involvement in planning gardens and reception halls demonstrates understanding that every aspect of royal environment contributes to the effectiveness of absolute rule. Louis's military education intensifies as he approaches majority, with daily exercises that combine traditional martial skills with modern strategic thinking, appropriate for commanding the largest army in Europe. His morning riding lessons evolve into complex maneuvers that simulate battlefield conditions, while afternoon sessions with veteran officers provide insights into the human dimensions of military leadership. The king's genuine enthusiasm for military science reflects understanding that Bourbon authority ultimately depends on armed force capable of suppressing domestic rebellion and defeating foreign enemies. The management of court ceremonies becomes increasingly sophisticated as Louis learns to orchestrate social interactions that reinforce hierarchical relationships while providing opportunities for royal favour to reward loyalty and competence. His daily levee develops into elaborate ritual where the simple act of royal dressing becomes public demonstration of the social distinctions that organise French society according to proximity to royal person. The evening entertainments that follow state dinners create informal settings where political business continues through carefully choreographed conversations. Cardinal Mazarin's network of international correspondence provides Louis with intelligence about European politics that enables sophisticated understanding of diplomatic complexities facing France during the final phase of the 30 Years' War. The King's morning briefings include detailed analysis of Habsburg capabilities, English Civil War developments, and Ottoman expansion that will influence French strategy for decades. His afternoon meetings with foreign agents create personal relationships that supplement formal diplomatic channels while providing cover for intelligence operations throughout Europe. The question of royal marriage emerges as Louis approaches 20, though political considerations override personal preferences in ways that reflect the sacrificial demands of absolute monarchy. His daily routine includes discussions with marriage brokers who evaluate potential brides according to territorial advantages, military alliances, and dynastic legitimacy rather than personal compatibility. The king's acceptance of these constraints demonstrates maturation from adolescent romanticism toward adult understanding of royal obligations that transcend individual desires. The Peace of Westphalia, in 1648, establishes France as the dominant European power, while creating new responsibilities for Louis as he prepares to assume direct control of governmental machinery that Mazarin has refined during the Regency years. His daily involvement in treaty negotiations reveals diplomatic skills that surprise experienced ambassadors who had underestimated the young king's political sophistication. The morning celebrations following successful conclusion of peace talks mark the end of Louis's apprenticeship and beginning of personal rule that will transform European civilization. The death of Cardinal Mazarin in 1661 removes the last barrier to Louis XIV's assumption of complete royal authority, as he announces his intention to serve as his own chief minister in declaration that shocks courtiers accustomed to government through powerful favourites. His morning council meetings reveal determination to control every aspect of policy formation, rather than delegating authority to subordinates who might develop independent power bases. The king's evening studies expand to encompass detailed knowledge of administrative procedures that previous monarchs had left to professional bureaucrats. Louis's personal assumption of governmental control coincides with systematic reforms that transform French administration from collection of competing departments into unified system responsive to royal will alone. His daily schedule expands to include direct oversight of military appointments, judicial decisions, and economic policies that affect every aspect of French society. The king's remarkable capacity for detailed work enables him to maintain personal knowledge of governmental operations that would overwhelm lesser rulers, creating unprecedented concentration of authority in royal hands. The construction of Versailles accelerates during this period as Louis implements his vision of royal residence that will serve as both administrative centre and symbolic demonstration of absolute monarchy's magnificence. His afternoon inspections of building progress reveal attention to details ranging from door handle designs to garden fountain mechanisms, ensuring that every element contributes to overall effects of grandeur and harmony. The king's personal involvement in selecting furniture, artwork, and decorative objects creates a unified aesthetic environment that reinforces political messages about royal supremacy. The development of court etiquette reaches new levels of complexity as Louis systematically regulates social interactions according to principles that transform daily routine into continuous ceremony honoring royal authority. His morning levee becomes theatrical performance, where great nobles compete for privileges of handling royal clothing or serving royal breakfast, creating hierarchies of honor that replace traditional feudal relationships with dependencies on royal favor. The elaborate protocols governing access to royal presence ensure that every encounter reinforces social distinctions while providing opportunities for reward or punishment through ceremonial recognition. Louis's approach to religious policy reflects lessons learned from his grandfather's conversion and his father's struggles with Protestant minorities, as he seeks to achieve religious unity through gradual pressure rather than violent confrontation. His daily devotions in the royal chapel demonstrate personal piety while serving political functions of reinforcing divine sanction for royal authority. The king's evening conferences with church officials balance respect for clerical privilege against assertions of royal supremacy in temporal affairs that affect religious communities. The expansion of French military capabilities under Louis's direct command transforms the kingdom's armed forces into professional instrument capable of sustained campaigns against multiple enemies simultaneously. His morning reviews of military reports reveal comprehensive understanding of logistical requirements, strategic possibilities, and tactical innovations that enable France to project power throughout Europe. The King's afternoon meetings with field commanders create personal relationships that ensure loyalty while providing detailed knowledge of military capabilities and limitations. The cultural renaissance that flourishes under Louis XIV's patronage reflects his understanding that artistic achievement serves political purposes by demonstrating French superiority in areas that influence international prestige. His daily interactions with artists, writers, and scholars create an atmosphere of intellectual ferment while ensuring that creative works support rather than challenge royal authority. The King's evening attendance at musical and theatrical performances provides opportunities for informal diplomacy while displaying cultural sophistication that enhances France's reputation among foreign courts. The economic policies implemented during this period reveal Louis's commitment to developing French commercial and manufacturing capabilities that will support military expansion while reducing dependence on foreign suppliers. His weekly meetings with financial ministers combine detailed analysis of tax revenues with strategic planning for infrastructure projects that will strengthen royal authority while promoting general prosperity. The King's personal involvement in monetary policy decisions reflects understanding that economic strength provides foundation for all other aspects of royal power. The marriage negotiations that culminate in Louis XIV's union with Maria Theresa of Spain represent diplomatic revolution that transforms European alliance systems while securing territorial gains that round out French frontiers. The elaborate ceremonies surrounding the royal wedding demonstrate international recognition of French supremacy while providing opportunities for displaying cultural magnificence that reinforces political messages. The King's personal conduct during these celebrations reveals mastery of ceremonial requirements while maintaining dignity appropriate to his supreme position among European rulers. The birth of the Grand Dauphin in 1661 provides the Bourbon Dynasty with direct heir, whose existence ensures continuation of royal line while creating new responsibilities for Louis as father and dynastic leader. His daily visits to the royal nursery reveal genuine paternal affection, tempered by understanding that royal children must be prepared for political burdens that ordinary families never face. The elaborate planning for the prince's education reflects lessons learned from previous Bourbon successions about importance of proper training for effective kingship. The systematic exclusion of great nobles from meaningful governmental roles represents Louis XIV's solution to problems that had plagued earlier Bourbon reigns, as he transforms potential rivals into decorative courtiers dependent on royal favour for status and income. His daily management of court ceremonies creates alternative sources of honour and advancement that channel aristocratic ambitions into harmless competition for ceremonial privileges rather than dangerous pursuit of independent political power. The King's evening entertainments become extensions of governmental control, as social interactions serve political purposes of reinforcing royal supremacy, as Louis XIV consolidates absolute authority during the 1660s. The daily routines he establishes at Versailles create a new model of European kingship that will influence monarchy throughout the continent, while establishing foundations for French dominance that will endure until revolutionary forces eventually destroy the system he perfects. His morning councils shape international politics, while his afternoon ceremonies demonstrate cultural achievements that complement military conquests in establishing France as the supreme European power. The patterns of absolute rule that Louis creates through personal example will guide the Bourbon dynasty through its greatest triumphs and ultimate catastrophe in the turbulent centuries ahead. The morning light streaming through the tall windows of Versailles illuminates a king who has transformed the very nature of European monarchy through sheer force of will and unprecedented attention to detail. Louis XIV's daily routine has evolved into a masterpiece of political theatre, where every gesture carries symbolic weight and every decision reverberates across the continent. His lever begins before dawn, with servants who move through choreographed sequences that have been refined over decades, each action designed to reinforce the divine nature of royal authority, while managing the practical business of governing the most powerful kingdom in Europe. The king's breakfast chamber fills with courtiers whose presence serves multiple functions beyond mere ceremony, as Louis uses these intimate morning gatherings to gauge aristocratic sentiment while dispensing favor through carefully calculated gestures of recognition. His consumption of simple bread and wine becomes a sacramental act witnessed by men whose ancestors once challenged royal authority, but now compete desperately for the privilege of observing their monarch's most mundane activities. The transformation of basic human needs into elaborate rituals demonstrates Louis's genius for converting potential weakness into sources of strength. The morning council meetings that follow reveal the extraordinary scope of royal authority that Louis has accumulated through systematic elimination of competing power centers. As ministers arrive bearing reports that encompass everything from colonial administration to cathedral construction. His personal review of military dispatches from frontiers spanning from Flanders to the Pyrenees shows comprehensive grasp of strategic situations that would overwhelm lesser rulers, while his detailed knowledge of tax collection procedures in remote provinces demonstrates administrative mastery that previous kings had delegated to subordinates. The council chamber becomes the nerve center of European politics, where decisions made over morning coffee determine the fate of millions. Louis's afternoon progresses through the gardens of Versailles reveal his understanding that royal authority must be constantly performed rather than simply possessed. As he conducts informal audiences with visiting dignitaries, while displaying the cultural magnificence that reinforces French supremacy, his walks along perfectly manicured pathways become diplomatic occasions where treaties are negotiated through seemingly casual conversations about fountain design and topiary arrangement. The king's ability to combine aesthetic pleasure with political business creates unique opportunities for advancing French interests, while maintaining the appearance of effortless superiority that foreign courts struggle to match. The elaborate dinner ceremonies that dominate Louis's early evening hours transform the basic act of nourishment into spectacular demonstrations of royal grandeur that serve both domestic and international political purposes. His consumption of multiple courses prepared by teams of specialized chefs becomes public performance, attended by hundreds of observers, whose presence validates the social hierarchies that organize French society according to proximity to royal person. The king's conversation during these meals ranges across topics from military engineering to musical composition, displaying intellectual breadth that justifies claims to divine inspiration while gathering intelligence about court sentiment and foreign developments. The question of Spanish succession begins to dominate Louis's private evening consultations as the health of his brother-in-law Carlos II creates possibilities for territorial expansion that could establish French hegemony over European affairs for generations. His detailed study of genealogical charts and inheritance laws reveals determination to advance Bourbon claims through legal argumentation while preparing military capabilities necessary to enforce dynastic rights against inevitable opposition. The king's private correspondence with Spanish court officials reflects sophisticated understanding of internal politics that could facilitate French influence over Habsburg territories. The War of the League of Augsburg transforms Louis's daily routine as military campaigns require constant attention to logistical details and strategic coordination that test the administrative systems he has spent decades perfecting. His morning briefings expand to include reports from multiple theatres of operations where French armies face coalitions determined to contain Bourbon expansion through collective resistance. The king's afternoon meetings with field commanders reveal personal involvement in tactical planning that surprises veteran officers who had expected ceremonial rather than practical military leadership from a monarch famous for cultural achievements. The financial strains imposed by prolonged warfare force Louis to confront limitations of royal authority as even absolute monarchy cannot generate resources beyond the productive capacity of French society. His evening conferences with financial ministers become exercises in economic realism as the king learns painful lessons about relationship between military ambitions and fiscal capabilities. The magnificent court ceremonies that had demonstrated royal power now serve defensive functions of maintaining morale while concealing growing weaknesses that threaten foundations of absolute rule. The death of the Grand Dauphin in 1711 devastates Louis personally, while creating succession crisis that threatens Bourbon continuity, just as military defeats begin undermining French international position. His daily visits to the royal chapel become extended periods of prayer and reflection, as the king struggles to understand divine will that seems to have abandoned the dynasty he has devoted his life to glorifying. The morning councils that once shaped European politics now focus on desperate efforts to preserve French territorial integrity against enemies who sense opportunity in royal weakness and national exhaustion. The emergence of his great-grandson as heir apparent forces Louis to contemplate governmental arrangements that will protect Bourbon interests during another regency, while preserving absolute monarchy against challenges that had nearly destroyed his own minority. His afternoon sessions with legal scholars focus on constitutional questions about royal authority during succession transitions, as he seeks to prevent repetition of noble rebellions that had traumatized his childhood. The king's careful planning for future regency reveals understanding that personal charisma cannot be inherited and that institutional structures must compensate for individual limitations. Louis XIV's final years unfold in chambers where morning light reveals physical decline that mirrors France's diminished international position following military defeats that have shattered illusions of invincibility. His daily routine contracts as age and illness limit activities that had once demonstrated inexhaustible royal energy, while court ceremonies continue with reduced magnificence that reflects economic constraints imposed by decades of warfare. The king's evening reflections on his reign reveal mixture of pride in achievements and regret for opportunities missed through excessive ambition that overextended French capabilities. The elaborate plans for royal funeral arrangements become Louis's final act of political theatre, as he orchestrates ceremonies designed to reinforce Bourbon legitimacy during vulnerable transition period, when enemies might exploit apparent weakness. His detailed instructions for court protocols during mourning period reflect understanding that royal authority must survive individual mortality through institutional continuity and ceremonial tradition. The king's last conversations with his successor reveal desperate attempts to transmit wisdom gained through 7 decades of absolute rule to child, who will inherit throne but not experience necessary to govern effectively. The death of Louis XIV on September 1st, 1715, marks the end of personal monarchy that had dominated European affairs for over half a century, while creating new challenges for Bourbon dynasty that must maintain authority without charismatic leadership that had made absolute rule seem natural and inevitable. The magnificent funeral cortege that winds through Paris streets cannot disguise political realities that await 5-year-old Louis XV, whose reign begins under circumstances that mirror his great-grandfather's childhood experiences of powerlessness and uncertainty. The regency of Philippe d'Orléans unfolds according to patterns established during previous minority governments, though financial crisis inherited from Louis XIV's wars creates more severe constraints on royal authority than earlier regents had faced. His morning councils grapple with bankruptcy that threatens basic governmental functions, while foreign powers monitor French weakness for opportunities to reverse territorial losses suffered during recent conflicts. The regent's afternoon audiences with creditors replace ceremonial receptions, as pressing financial needs override traditional court protocols that had reinforced royal dignity. The development of the Mississippi bubble during this period reveals desperate attempts to resolve fiscal crisis through financial innovations that promise miraculous solutions to problems created by decades of military expenditure beyond French economic capacity. The regent's evening meetings with John Law and other economic theorists reflect willingness to experiment with monetary policies that previous Bourbon rulers would have rejected as beneath royal dignity. The collapse of speculative schemes creates new sources of social tension while discrediting royal judgment in areas where absolute monarchy claims divine wisdom. The education of Louis XV proceeds under shadow of financial crisis and political instability that threatens foundations of absolute monarchy established by his predecessors through personal strength and administrative competence. His daily tutoring sessions combine traditional royal instruction with practical lessons about governing a kingdom whose resources have been exhausted by previous generations' ambitions. The young king's morning exercises in royal protocol alternate with afternoon briefings on economic realities that will constrain his future reign in ways that Louis XIV never experienced. The gradual assumption of personal authority by Louis XV reveals personality traits that contrast sharply with previous Bourbon rulers, as natural shyness and intellectual uncertainty replace confident assertion of divine right that had characterized earlier kings. His morning audiences become exercises in hesitation rather than decisive command, while afternoon council meetings often end without clear resolution of policy questions that require royal judgment. The king's evening retreats into private apartments reflect preference for solitude that conflicts with ceremonial requirements of absolute monarchy. The emergence of Madame de Pompadour as royal favourite creates new patterns of court influence that bypass traditional ministerial channels, while reflecting Louis XV's need for emotional support that ceremonial relationships cannot provide. Her daily presence at informal royal gatherings transforms decision-making processes as personal affection influences policy choices in ways that previous Bourbon kings had carefully avoided. The morning conversations between king and mistress often determine governmental priorities, while afternoon entertainments become extensions of political influence that threatens institutional structures supporting absolute rule. The 7 Years' War tests French military capabilities against reformed enemies who have learned lessons from previous conflicts while developing new strategic approaches that neutralize traditional advantages of royal armies. Louis XV's daily military briefings reveal growing awareness of French limitations, while foreign victories demonstrate effectiveness of political systems that distribute authority rather than concentrating power in royal hands. The king's afternoon meetings with defeated generals become exercises in damage control, as military disasters undermine royal prestige that had served as foundation for absolute authority. The loss of Canada and other colonial territories during this conflict represents more than military defeat, as territorial reductions signal broader decline of French power relative to emerging rivals whose governmental systems prove more adaptable to changing international conditions. The king's evening reviews of peace negotiations reveal painful recognition that France must accept subordinate position after centuries of European dominance under Bourbon rule. The daily routine that had once shaped continental politics now focuses on managing decline while preserving royal dignity during humiliating retreats from previous ambitions. The influence of Enlightenment philosophy begins penetrating court circles during Louis XV's later years, as intellectual challenges to absolute monarchy gain credibility among educated elites who observe governmental failures that discredit claims of royal wisdom and divine inspiration. The king's morning reading includes works by philosophers whose criticism of traditional authority creates crisis of confidence within royal administration. His afternoon discussions with reform-minded ministers reveal growing awareness that absolute monarchy may require fundamental modifications to survive changing social and political conditions. The financial reforms attempted during this period reflect desperate efforts to address fiscal problems through administrative efficiency rather than the comprehensive restructuring that economic realities demand. The king's evening conferences with financial advisors become exercises in postponing rather than solving underlying problems, as traditional sources of royal revenue prove inadequate for contemporary governmental needs. The growing resistance to taxation among privileged classes reveals limitations of absolute authority when economic interests conflict with royal commands. The death of Madame de Pompadour removes stabilizing influence on royal decision-making while creating opportunities for competing factions to influence policy through new favorites who lack her political sophistication and administrative experience. Louis XV's daily routine becomes increasingly erratic as personal grief combines with governmental pressures to undermine consistent leadership that absolute monarchy requires. The mourning ceremonies that had reinforced royal authority now serve defensive functions of maintaining appearances while concealing growing weaknesses in monarchical system. The emergence of Madame du Barry as new royal favourite introduces different dynamics to court politics, as her humble origins and limited education create resentment among aristocratic families who view her influence as degradation of royal dignity. Her presence at state functions generates controversy that undermines ceremonial effectiveness while providing enemies of absolute monarchy with evidence of royal moral decline. The king's protection of his mistress against court opposition reveals emotional dependencies that compromise political judgment in ways that threaten institutional stability. The Maupeou reforms represent Louis XV's most serious attempt to strengthen royal authority through systematic assault on traditional privileges that limit absolute monarchy's effectiveness. His daily involvement in judicial reorganization reveals belated recognition that governmental modernization requires confrontation with established interests rather than accommodation that preserves social harmony at expense of administrative efficiency. The morning sessions with Chancellor Maupeou become planning meetings for constitutional revolution that could restore royal supremacy or trigger broader resistance that destroys monarchical system entirely. The opposition to these reforms demonstrates how deeply constitutional limitations have penetrated French political culture as parliaments and provincial assemblies resist royal commands with arguments based on historical precedent and natural rights theory. The king's afternoon audiences with protesting magistrates become debates about fundamental nature of political authority as traditional justifications for absolute rule face systematic intellectual challenge. The evening reports from provincial administrators reveal growing resistance to royal authority throughout kingdom as reform efforts trigger broader questioning of monarchical legitimacy. Louis XV's final illness unfolds during spring of 1774 as smallpox ravages royal constitution, weakened by decades of self-indulgence and political stress that have undermined both personal health and institutional authority. His daily struggle against disease becomes metaphor for Bourbon Dynasty's broader fight for survival against forces that threaten foundations of absolute monarchy. The elaborate medical consultations that fill his sick room cannot address underlying problems that extend far beyond individual mortality to encompass systematic crisis of traditional government. The death of Louis XV on May 10, 1774, removes personality who had presided over decline of French power while failing to implement reforms necessary for institutional renewal. His funeral ceremonies lack magnificence that had characterized earlier royal obsequies as financial constraints, and political divisions limit demonstrations of monarchical grandeur. The morning when 20-year-old Louis XVI awakens to find himself King of France marks beginning of final chapter in Bourbon history, as revolutionary forces gather strength that will eventually destroy everything his predecessors had built through 3 centuries of absolute rule. Centuries of absolute rule. The coronation of Louis XVI at Reims Cathedral unfolds on a misty June morning in 1775, where ancient stones witness ceremonies that have sanctified French kings for over a millennium, though the 20-year-old monarch kneeling before the altar possesses neither the commanding presence nor political instincts that sustained his predecessors through previous crises. His morning preparation in the cathedral vestry reveals nervous energy barely concealed beneath ceremonial robes as he practices responses to liturgical questions while advisors whisper final instructions about protocol that must appear effortless despite his obvious anxiety about assuming responsibilities that terrify rather than inspire him. The elaborate ritual that transforms Louis Auguste into Louis XVI cannot disguise fundamental uncertainties about royal authority that plague both the new king and his subjects, as economic crisis and intellectual revolution have undermined traditional justifications for absolute monarchy faster than ceremonial tradition can adapt to changing circumstances. His afternoon reception of homage from great nobles reveals awkward hesitation where confident command should dominate, while evening celebrations at Versailles demonstrate diminished magnificence that reflects both financial constraints and growing skepticism about monarchical extravagance among populations struggling with taxation and food shortages. Marie Antoinette's parallel journey from Austrian Archduchess to Queen of France creates additional complications for Bourbon legitimacy, as her foreign origins and expensive tastes provide convenient targets for critics seeking to blame royal family for national problems that extend far beyond individual personalities. Her morning toilette becomes elaborate performance, attended by ladies-in-waiting who observe every gesture for signs of Austrian influence that might compromise French interests, while her afternoon entertainments generate gossip about frivolous spending that ignores deeper structural problems requiring comprehensive reform rather than ceremonial adjustments. The daily routine that emerges during the early years of Louis XVI's reign reveals well-intentioned but fundamentally inadequate responses to challenges that demand revolutionary solutions rather than traditional royal remedies. His morning councils address symptoms of fiscal crisis through piecemeal measures, while avoiding systematic examination of privileged exemptions that prevent equitable taxation, while afternoon audiences with reform-minded ministers generate proposals that die in evening meetings with conservative advisors who prioritize social stability over economic necessity. Jacques Necker's appointment as Director General of Finances represents Louis XVI's most significant attempt to address governmental insolvency through administrative expertise rather than political transformation, though the Swiss banker's foreign Protestant background creates additional controversies that complicate efforts to build support for necessary reforms. His daily meetings with the king combine detailed analysis of revenue shortfalls with diplomatic discussions about presenting unpleasant fiscal realities to privileged classes whose cooperation remains essential for any meaningful solution to France's deepening financial crisis. The publication of Necker's Compte Rendu shocks French society by revealing the extent of governmental debt, while demonstrating that royal finances can be subjected to public scrutiny without destroying monarchical authority, though the transparency that builds temporary confidence also establishes precedents for popular participation in political decision-making that absolute monarchy cannot ultimately control. The king's morning reactions to public discussion of state secrets reveal discomfort with democratic accountability that conflicts with traditional royal prerogatives, while afternoon consultations about damage control strategies fail to recognize that informational revolution cannot be reversed through ceremonial reassurance. The decision to support American colonial rebellion against British rule represents Louis XVI's most consequential foreign policy choice, as military intervention provides opportunities for revenge against traditional enemies while creating enormous additional expenses that accelerate France's slide toward bankruptcy. His daily briefings about North American campaigns reveal genuine enthusiasm for liberty that contrasts sharply with domestic resistance to reforms that would extend similar freedoms to French subjects, while evening celebrations of American victories ignore ironic implications of royal support for revolutionary principles that challenge monarchical authority throughout Europe. The return of French volunteers from American service introduces dangerous ideas about popular sovereignty and individual rights that spread through educated classes with revolutionary implications that royal authority proves powerless to contain or redirect toward harmless channels. The king's morning audiences with veteran officers reveal growing influence of democratic ideology among military professionals whose loyalty provides essential foundation for royal authority, while afternoon discussions about American political innovations demonstrate intellectual curiosity that conflicts with practical need to suppress similar experiments in France. The Assembly of Notables, convened in 1787, represents Louis XVI's belated recognition that fiscal crisis requires political solutions that absolute monarchy cannot implement through traditional administrative channels, though his hopes for voluntary cooperation from privileged classes prove naive, given entrenched resistance to reforms that threaten established economic advantages. His daily participation in assembly proceedings reveals personal sincerity about reform objectives, while demonstrating political incompetence that encourages opposition to exploit royal weakness rather than supporting necessary changes that could preserve modified monarchical system. The failure of the Assembly to approve new taxation forces Louis XVI toward more radical solutions that threaten foundations of absolute monarchy, while offering uncertain prospects for resolving underlying problems that have accumulated over decades of fiscal irresponsibility and administrative incompetence. His morning consultations about calling the Estates General reveal awareness that traditional royal authority cannot survive democratic deliberation, while evening discussions with Marie Antoinette about potential exile demonstrate growing recognition that revolutionary forces may prove stronger than monarchical resistance. The elections for the Estates General during the spring of 1789 transform French political culture as millions of subjects participate in choosing representatives who will determine the kingdom's future through procedures that bypass royal authority in favour of popular sovereignty. The King's daily reports about electoral developments reveal alarm about democratic enthusiasm that exceeds all expectations, while threatening to overwhelm careful royal plans for limited constitutional monarchy that preserves essential monarchical prerogatives within reformed governmental structure. The cahiers de doléances that accompany electoral processes provide comprehensive documentation of popular grievances that extend far beyond fiscal problems to encompass fundamental criticism of absolute monarchy's impact on French society throughout previous centuries of Bourbon rule. Louis XVI's morning reviews of these petitions reveal scope of popular dissatisfaction, while demonstrating royal inability to address underlying problems through traditional administrative remedies that preserve monarchical authority while satisfying democratic demands for genuine political participation. The opening of the Estates General at Versailles on May 5, 1789, marks the beginning of revolutionary transformation that will destroy absolute monarchy, despite Louis XVI's desperate attempts to control democratic forces that prove stronger than royal authority. His morning preparation for ceremonial inauguration reveals anxiety about confronting elected representatives whose legitimacy derives from popular mandate rather than royal appointment, while afternoon proceedings demonstrate that traditional ceremonial advantages cannot overcome political momentum generated by economic crisis and intellectual revolution. The tennis court oath sworn by Third Estate deputies on June 20th establishes alternative source of political authority that challenges royal supremacy through constitutional principles derived from popular sovereignty rather than divine right, creating dual power structure that absolute monarchy cannot ultimately survive. The king's daily efforts to regain control through ceremonial gestures and administrative adjustments prove inadequate against revolutionary determination to create new governmental system based on democratic representation rather than monarchical command. The storming of the Bastille on July 14th demonstrates popular capacity for violent resistance to royal authority while providing revolutionary movement with symbolic victory that transforms political struggle from parliamentary debate into armed conflict between competing visions of legitimate government. Louis XVI's morning reactions to reports of Parisian uprising reveal complete bewilderment about popular forces that have escaped royal control, while afternoon consultations about military responses demonstrate fatal hesitation that allows revolutionary momentum to build beyond possibility of peaceful resolution. The great fear that sweeps through French countryside during late July spreads revolutionary violence beyond Paris, while destroying feudal relationships that had provided foundation for traditional social order throughout centuries of monarchical rule. The king's daily reports about provincial rebellions reveal extent of popular hatred for aristocratic privileges, while demonstrating royal powerlessness to protect traditional allies whose support had sustained absolute monarchy against previous challenges to royal authority. The August 4th abolition of feudalism by National Assembly eliminates economic foundation of traditional aristocratic power while establishing revolutionary precedent for systematic destruction of old regime institutions through legislative rather than royal authority. Louis XVI's morning review of assembly proceedings reveals growing recognition that constitutional monarchy may require abandoning essential prerogatives that had defined absolute rule, while evening discussions about potential resistance strategies demonstrate indecision that encourages revolutionary forces to pursue increasingly radical objectives. The Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, proclaimed on August 26th, establishes philosophical foundation for democratic government that explicitly contradicts divine right theory supporting absolute monarchy, creating intellectual framework for systematic opposition to royal authority through natural rights, arguments that prove irrefutable within Enlightenment discourse. The king's daily consultations about appropriate responses reveal inability to develop effective counterarguments against revolutionary ideology, while afternoon meetings with conservative advisors generate futile proposals for restoring traditional authority through ceremonial adjustments that ignore underlying philosophical transformation. The October days that bring royal family from Versailles to Paris demonstrate popular determination to control monarchical authority through physical proximity and constant surveillance that makes independent royal action impossible. Louis XVI's final morning at Versailles reveals personal anguish about leaving palace that had embodied Bourbon magnificence, while afternoon journey to Tuileries Palace marks beginning of captivity that will end only with a revolutionary execution that destroys Bourbon dynasty along with absolute monarchy throughout Europe. The daily routine that emerges during royal imprisonment in Paris reflects complete reversal of traditional relationships between monarch and subjects, as popular representatives exercise authority while royal family submits to democratic surveillance that transforms kings into prisoners of revolutionary state. His morning audiences now consist of receiving revolutionary officials rather than granting access to court petitioners, while afternoon activities require permission from guards who treat former absolute monarch as potential enemy of popular sovereignty rather than divinely appointed ruler deserving automatic obedience and ceremonial respect. The constitutional monarchy experiment that Louis XVI reluctantly accepts during 1790 unfolds through daily humiliations that systematically strip away ceremonial privileges while preserving nominal royal titles that mock rather than dignify his reduced circumstances. His morning routine now begins with revolutionary guards who enter his chambers without permission, searching for correspondence that might reveal counter-revolutionary plotting while treating the descendant of Louis XIV like a common criminal requiring constant supervision. The simple act of dressing becomes political theatre, as servants must obtain approval for royal clothing choices that might send inappropriate messages about monarchical pretensions. The king's breakfast table, once surrounded by competing courtiers eager for royal favour, now hosts revolutionary commissioners who monitor every conversation while taking notes about potential treasonous statements that could justify additional restrictions on royal liberty. His morning correspondence arrives pre-opened by censors who remove letters deemed unsuitable for royal eyes, while outgoing messages require approval from officials who treat former absolute monarch as potential security threat, rather than constitutional head of state deserving minimal respect for ceremonial functions. The daily routine imposed upon Marie Antoinette reveals even greater revolutionary hostility, as popular hatred focuses on foreign queen whose Austrian origins and expensive tastes provide convenient explanation for France's economic collapse. Her morning toilette becomes public spectacle, attended by hostile observers who document evidence of aristocratic excess while searching for hidden jewels that might finance counter-revolutionary activities. The elaborate ceremonies that had reinforced royal dignity now serve revolutionary purposes of demonstrating monarchical subjugation to popular authority through systematic humiliation. The education of the Dauphin proceeds under revolutionary supervision, designed to transform royal heir into republican citizen loyal to democratic principles, rather than hereditary privilege that threatens popular sovereignty. His morning lessons now emphasize natural equality rather than divine right, while afternoon exercises include manual labor intended to prepare future citizen for productive work rather than parasitic luxury that characterizes aristocratic lifestyle. The young prince's bewilderment about his changing circumstances reflects broader confusion among royal family members who cannot comprehend revolutionary transformation of familiar world. Louis XVI's attempts to fulfill constitutional obligations while secretly hoping for counter-revolutionary intervention create daily contradictions that undermine both revolutionary confidence in royal loyalty and royalist hopes for restoration of traditional authority. His morning meetings with constitutional ministers require performances of democratic enthusiasm that conflict with evening consultations about escape plans that could restore absolute monarchy through foreign military assistance. The king's fundamental inability to accept revolutionary legitimacy ensures continued suspicion that makes constitutional compromise impossible. The flight to Varennes in June 1791 represents Louis XVI's most desperate attempt to escape revolutionary constraints while appealing to European monarchs for military intervention that could restore Bourbon authority through foreign conquest rather than domestic reconciliation. His morning departure from Tuileries Palace under cover of darkness reveals careful planning that might have succeeded with better execution, while afternoon capture at Varennes demonstrates fatal royal incompetence that provides revolutionaries with definitive proof of monarchical treachery against constitutional settlement. The return journey to Paris unfolds as triumphal procession for revolutionary forces, who parade captured royal family through hostile crowds that demonstrate popular rejection of monarchical authority, even in modified constitutional form. Louis XVI's daily experience of revolutionary hatred during this humiliating journey reveals extent of popular animosity that makes any restoration of royal legitimacy impossible through peaceful means, while Marie Antoinette's visible terror at crowd hostility demonstrates aristocratic inability to comprehend democratic forces that have escaped traditional social controls. The massacre on the Champ de Mars in July 1791 reveals growing divisions within revolutionary movement as moderate constitutional monarchists face challenges from radical republicans who demand complete abolition of royal institution rather than continued tolerance for reformed monarchy. The king's daily observations of revolutionary factional conflict provide temporary hope that democratic divisions might create opportunities for royalist resurgence, while evening reports from foreign courts suggest potential military intervention that could restore traditional authority through international cooperation. The declaration of war against Austria in April 1792 transforms royal family situation from house arrest to active treason as military conflict makes royal loyalty to French revolutionary state impossible, given Marie Antoinette's Habsburg connections and Louis XVI's secret correspondence with enemy powers. His daily routine now includes interrogations about foreign intelligence that revolutionary authorities suspect flows through royal channels, while afternoon restrictions confine royal family to increasingly limited areas of Tuileries Palace, under guard reinforcement that treats former monarchs as enemy agents. The invasion of Tuileries Palace on August 10, 1792, destroys constitutional monarchy through popular violence that demonstrates revolutionary determination to eliminate royal institution entirely rather than tolerating continued monarchical participation in democratic government. Louis XVI's morning flight to Legislative Assembly, seeking protection, reveals complete breakdown of constitutional settlement, while afternoon suspension from royal office marks effective end of Bourbon rule after 8 centuries of continuous monarchical authority over French territory. The imprisonment of royal family in Temple Tower creates new daily routine of complete captivity, where former absolute monarchs experience revolutionary justice through systematic degradation designed to demonstrate popular supremacy over hereditary privilege. The king's morning routine now consists of revolutionary guards conducting searches and interrogations, while afternoon activities require permission for basic human needs that emphasize complete dependence on revolutionary mercy rather than traditional royal prerogatives that no longer possess any legal or practical significance. The trial of Louis XVI during winter of 1792–93 unfolds through legal proceedings that combine constitutional theory with revolutionary passion as elected representatives debate appropriate punishment for crimes against popular sovereignty committed during centuries of absolute rule. His daily appearances before National Convention reveal dignity maintained despite desperate circumstances, while evening preparations with legal counsel demonstrate futile efforts to develop defense arguments that might preserve royal life, if not royal authority, within revolutionary framework. The king's final speech to his judges reveals acceptance of death while maintaining innocence of specific charges that revolutionaries use to justify regicide as necessary protection for democratic government against monarchical restoration. His morning meditation before execution demonstrates religious faith that sustains personal courage, while afternoon preparations include final letters to family members who will soon face similar revolutionary justice designed to eliminate Bourbon dynasty entirely, rather than permitting any survivors who might serve as focal points for counter-revolutionary resistance. The execution of Louis XVI on January 21, 1793, eliminates thousand-year-old French monarchy while establishing revolutionary precedent for popular sovereignty that challenges absolute rule throughout Europe. The morning procession to scaffold reveals remarkable personal composure despite circumstances that would have broken weaker character, while final moments on guillotine mark end of political system that had seemed permanent until revolutionary forces proved stronger than traditional authority, supported by divine sanction and military force. Marie Antoinette's continued imprisonment after her husband's execution subjects former queen to additional months of psychological torture designed to extract confessions about treasonous activities while providing revolutionary entertainment through systematic humiliation of aristocratic privilege. Her daily routine in conciergerie prison strips away remaining vestiges of royal dignity through deliberate degradation that demonstrates popular hatred for foreign influence and aristocratic excess that revolutionaries blame for France's previous suffering under absolute monarchy. The trial and execution of Marie Antoinette in October 1793 completes revolutionary destruction of Bourbon royal family, while establishing precedent for systematic elimination of aristocratic class through judicial murder disguised as popular justice. Her morning walk to guillotine reveals courage that transcends political circumstances, while afternoon celebrations throughout Paris demonstrate revolutionary satisfaction with elimination of monarchical institution that had oppressed French people throughout centuries of absolute rule. The fate of royal children during terror reveals revolutionary determination to prevent any Bourbon restoration through elimination of potential heirs who might serve as rallying points for counter-revolutionary movements. The Dauphin's imprisonment in Temple Tower subjects 8-year-old child to psychological abuse designed to destroy royal identity, while his sister's survival depends on obscurity that protects her from revolutionary hatred directed against Bourbon name throughout period of radical Republican government. The mysterious death of young Louis XVII in Temple Prison eliminates direct male heir to Bourbon throne, while creating martyrdom legend that will inspire future royalist movements throughout 19th century. His daily suffering under revolutionary guard demonstrates extent of popular hatred for monarchical institution, while providing emotional foundation for counter-revolutionary resistance that will eventually contribute to Napoleon's rise and Bourbon restoration during European reaction against revolutionary excess. The survival of Madame Royale through revolutionary period creates sole legitimate Bourbon heir, whose eventual release and marriage to Bourbon cousin maintains dynastic continuity despite Republican interlude that temporarily destroys monarchical institution. Her daily routine during imprisonment reveals remarkable resilience that preserves royal dignity, despite circumstances designed to destroy aristocratic identity through systematic humiliation and psychological pressure that breaks weaker personalities completely. The emergence of Napoleon Bonaparte as military dictator, who eventually proclaims himself emperor, demonstrates revolutionary inability to maintain republican government without authoritarian leadership that resembles absolute monarchy in everything except hereditary legitimacy. His daily routine at Tuileries Palace consciously mimics royal ceremonial while rejecting Bourbon claims to legitimate authority through divine right theory that revolutionary ideology has supposedly discredited forever throughout European political consciousness. The Bourbon Restoration in 1814, following Napoleon's defeat, reveals persistence of monarchical legitimacy despite 25 years of republican and imperial government that had seemed to establish permanent alternative to hereditary rule. Louis XVIII's return to Tuileries Palace creates new daily routine that attempts to combine constitutional limitations with royal dignity while accommodating democratic expectations that absolute monarchy can never again dominate French political life without revolutionary resistance. The constitutional charter that governs restored monarchy reflects lessons learned from revolutionary period about necessity for popular participation in governmental decisions while preserving ceremonial functions that maintain royal dignity within limited framework. The King's morning audiences now include elected representatives whose authority derives from popular mandate rather than royal appointment, while afternoon ceremonies acknowledge traditional precedent within constitutional constraints that prevent return to absolute rule. The 100 Days that return. Napoleon to power demonstrate fragility of Bourbon restoration as military loyalty proves stronger than legitimist sentiment among populations that have experienced alternative forms of government during revolutionary period. Louis XVIII's morning flight from Paris reveals continued weakness of restored monarchy, while afternoon preparations for second exile demonstrate royal inability to command popular support necessary for effective government without foreign military assistance that compromises national independence. The final restoration following Waterloo establishes Bourbon rule under international protection that limits French sovereignty while maintaining monarchical institution through foreign guarantee rather than domestic legitimacy that previous kings had enjoyed. The daily routine that emerges reflects compromise between royal tradition and constitutional limitation while acknowledging revolutionary precedent that makes absolute monarchy impossible without triggering renewed popular resistance that could destroy European peace settlement. The reign of Charles VI represents final attempt to restore absolute monarchy through systematic rejection of constitutional constraints and revolutionary precedent that limits royal authority within democratic framework. His morning ceremonies consciously evoke Louis XIV's grandeur, while afternoon policies demonstrate determination to reverse revolutionary changes that have permanently altered French political consciousness, despite temporary acceptance of monarchical restoration under moderate constitutional arrangements. The July Revolution of 1830 provides final demonstration that French population will not tolerate return to absolute monarchy, regardless of legitimist claims or foreign support for Bourbon restoration. Charles VI's morning flight from Paris marks end of senior Bourbon line's political authority, while afternoon establishment of July monarchy under Orleans branch creates new constitutional arrangement that preserves monarchical institution, while acknowledging democratic principles that make absolute rule impossible in post-revolutionary European political environments. The July monarchy that emerges under Louis-Philippe d'Orléans represents a fascinating compromise between royal tradition and democratic necessity. As the new king's morning routine reveals careful attention to maintaining monarchical dignity while acknowledging constitutional limitations that prevent any return to absolute rule. His daily lever at the Tuileries Palace consciously avoids the elaborate ceremonial of previous Bourbon courts, yet preserves essential elements of royal protocol that distinguish constitutional monarchy from republican government. The king rises at 6 each morning to review newspapers that report parliamentary debates with unprecedented freedom, while his breakfast conversations with ministers reflect genuine consultation rather than ceremonial deference to royal wisdom. Louis Philippe's afternoon progresses through Paris. Streets demonstrate his understanding that popular monarchy requires constant visibility and accessibility that absolute rulers had never needed to maintain. His walks along the boulevards, accompanied by minimal security, reveal confidence in bourgeois support that sustains his reign while acknowledging democratic expectations about royal accountability to public opinion. These informal encounters with citizens create opportunities for the king to gauge popular sentiment while displaying the unpretentious manner that distinguishes his reign from previous Bourbon grandeur. The evening receptions at the Tuileries reflect the social transformation that has accompanied political revolution. As industrial wealth mingles with traditional aristocracy in gatherings that celebrate commercial success rather than hereditary privilege, Louis Philippe's personal interest in business and technology becomes evident through conversations with manufacturers and financiers who find royal support for economic development that previous kings had considered beneath royal attention. His study fills with reports from railroad companies and manufacturing enterprises that demonstrate royal commitment to material progress that benefits entire nation rather than court elite. The daily management of parliamentary government requires Louis Philippe to master new skills of constitutional monarchy that balance royal dignity with democratic accountability through careful navigation of party politics and ministerial responsibility. His morning meetings with prime ministers combine traditional royal consultation with acceptance of parliamentary supremacy that limits royal policy initiative, while preserving ceremonial functions that maintain monarchical legitimacy. The afternoon sessions with opposition leaders reveal his pragmatic approach to political conflict that seeks compromise rather than confrontation. The revolution of 1848 that destroys the July monarchy demonstrates the ultimate impossibility of maintaining any form of royal authority in France once democratic principles have taken deep root in popular consciousness. Louis Philippe's morning abdication on February 24th marks the end of over 8 centuries of continuous monarchical rule, as republican forces prove stronger than constitutional compromise that had temporarily preserved royal institution. His afternoon departure from Paris aboard a simple carriage, rather than royal coach, symbolizes the complete triumph of democratic ideology over hereditary privilege. The establishment of the Second Republic creates new patterns of daily governance that consciously reject all monarchical precedent, while establishing democratic procedures that will influence European political development throughout the remainder of the 19th century. The presidential palace at the Élysée becomes center of Republican authority, where elected leaders conduct morning briefings about national affairs without ceremonial protocols that had reinforced royal supremacy. The afternoon legislative sessions in the Chamber of Deputies demonstrate popular sovereignty through representatives chosen by universal suffrage rather than royal appointment. The brief restoration attempt by the Count of Chambord during the 1870s reveals the persistent emotional appeal of Bourbon legitimacy, despite practical impossibility of re-establishing monarchical government in modern democratic society. His morning audiences with royalist supporters in Austrian exile reflect nostalgic attachment to absolute monarchy that ignores political realities created by revolutionary transformation of French consciousness. The afternoon discussions about potential restoration terms demonstrate fundamental misunderstanding of democratic expectations that make constitutional monarchy impossible without genuine acceptance of popular sovereignty. The Third Republic's establishment provides final resolution to constitutional questions that had plagued France since 1789, as republican institutions achieve stability that monarchical restoration can never again threaten through popular appeal or foreign intervention. The daily routine at the Élysée Palace under successive presidents creates new traditions of democratic leadership that consciously avoid royal precedent while maintaining national dignity through constitutional rather than hereditary authority. The morning cabinet meetings address practical governance issues without ceremonial deference to personal rule that had characterized previous political systems. The industrial transformation of France during this period creates social conditions that make monarchical restoration impossible, regardless of legitimate sentiment among rural populations that remember pre-revolutionary society. The daily routine of factory workers and urban professionals reflects economic relationships that bypass traditional aristocratic intermediaries, while generating new forms of political consciousness based on class interests rather than regional loyalty. The afternoon strikes and political demonstrations in industrial cities reveal popular capacity for collective action that democratic government can accommodate, but monarchical authority could never control. The cultural memory of royal grandeur persists through preservation of Versailles as national monument that commemorates Bourbon achievements while demonstrating historical progression from absolute monarchy toward democratic government. The morning tours conducted through royal apartments reveal public fascination with aristocratic lifestyle that no longer threatens republican institutions through political restoration. The afternoon ceremonies at royal tombs in Saint-Denis honor historical significance while emphasizing temporal limitations of hereditary authority that revolutionary forces had permanently overcome. The emigrant nobility that returns to France during the 19th century must adapt to social conditions that reduce aristocratic titles to ceremonial decoration rather than political authority or economic privilege that had sustained previous generations. Their daily routine reflects gradual integration into bourgeois society, where commercial success matters more than genealogical distinction, while evening salons maintain cultural traditions without political significance. The transformation of former courtiers into private citizens demonstrates complete victory of democratic principles over aristocratic pretension. The monarchist political parties that emerged during the Third Republic represent nostalgic attachment to royal tradition rather than serious possibility for governmental restoration, as their daily activities focus on commemorative ceremonies and historical research rather than practical political organization. Their morning meetings in private clubs discuss theoretical questions about constitutional monarchy, while afternoon publications appeal to sentimental rather than political motivations among readers who appreciate royal history without supporting actual restoration. The final pretender to the Bourbon throne lives quietly in private exile, where daily routine reflects acceptance of political irrelevance, while maintaining personal dignity through adherence to royal protocol that serves psychological rather than political functions. His morning correspondence with scattered legitimist supporters demonstrates persistent loyalty to monarchical principle while acknowledging practical impossibility of restoration through democratic process. The afternoon receptions for visiting royalist delegations maintain ceremonial traditions without political significance in republican society. The death of the last Bourbon claimant in the 20th century marks symbolic end of dynasty, whose political authority had been destroyed by revolutionary forces over a century earlier, though cultural influence persists through historical memory and artistic achievement that transcends political circumstances. His morning funeral services attract representatives of European royal families whose presence honors past rather than future political possibilities, while afternoon ceremonies at Versailles commemorate historical significance without suggesting contemporary relevance for monarchical government. The preservation of Bourbon palaces and artistic collections serves educational rather than political purposes, as republican government maintains cultural heritage while firmly rejecting political precedent that absolute monarchy had represented. The daily administration of these historical sites creates employment for scholars and guides who interpret royal history for democratic audiences that appreciate artistic achievement without political nostalgia. The morning lectures about court ceremonies educate visitors about past social systems while emphasizing historical progress toward democratic equality. The academic study of Bourbon history during the modern period focuses on understanding social and political transformation rather than celebrating royal achievements. as university professors conduct morning seminars about absolute monarchies' development and decline. Their afternoon research in royal archives documents governmental evolution while analysing factors that made democratic revolution inevitable despite monarchical attempts at reform. The evening publications by professional historians contribute to national understanding of political development without legitimist bias that might suggest monarchical restoration. The tourist industry that develops around royal sites demonstrates commercial rather than political interest in Bourbon heritage, as daily visitors appreciate architectural magnificence and historical drama without political implications for contemporary government. The morning crowds at Versailles reflect global fascination with royal lifestyle, while afternoon sales of commemorative items generate revenue for Republican treasury rather than royalist cause. The transformation of royal residences into profitable attractions symbolizes complete triumph of democratic values over aristocratic privilege. The modern French Republic incorporates selected royal traditions into state ceremonies that honor historical continuity while emphasizing republican principles, as presidential receptions at the Élysée Palace consciously avoid monarchical precedent while maintaining national dignity appropriate to democratic leadership. The morning preparations for state visits combine republican protocol with ceremonial elements that reflect cultural heritage rather than political restoration. The afternoon diplomatic functions demonstrate France's continued international prestige through democratic rather than royal authority. The centennial commemorations of revolutionary events during the 20th century provide opportunities for national reflection on political transformation that eliminated monarchical government while creating democratic institutions that have proven more durable than royal authority. The morning ceremonies at revolutionary sites honor popular sovereignty, while afternoon academic conferences analyze historical factors that made democratic transition inevitable, despite initial resistance from traditional authorities. The evening celebrations throughout France demonstrate popular commitment to republican principles that makes monarchical restoration permanently impossible. The European Union's development during the late 20th century creates new forms of international cooperation that transcend national sovereignty while preserving democratic principles that the French Revolution had established against monarchical opposition. The daily meetings in Brussels and Strasbourg demonstrate peaceful resolution of conflicts that had previously required royal diplomacy backed by military force, while afternoon negotiations achieve economic integration through democratic process rather than dynastic marriage or territorial conquest that had characterized monarchical statecraft. The cultural influence of Bourbon artistic patronage continues through museum collections and architectural preservation that inspire contemporary creativity, while serving educational purposes about historical development of French civilization. The morning classes in art history analyze royal collections for aesthetic rather than political significance, while afternoon conservation work preserves cultural heritage for democratic society that appreciates artistic achievement without aristocratic context. The evening concerts in former royal residences demonstrate continued vitality of cultural traditions within republican framework. The psychological appeal of royal romance persists in popular culture through films and novels that explore human drama of absolute monarchy while avoiding political endorsement of hierarchical government. The morning audiences for historical documentaries reflect fascination with individual personalities rather than governmental systems, while afternoon discussions in book clubs analyze royal biographies for entertainment rather than political instruction. The transformation of royal history into popular entertainment demonstrates complete separation of cultural interest from political relevance. The academic conferences that regularly examine Bourbon history bring together international scholars whose morning presentations analyze royal government's strengths and weaknesses without advocating restoration of abolished institutions. Their afternoon discussions compare absolute monarchy with contemporary democratic systems, while evening publications contribute to historical understanding rather than political propaganda. The scholarly consensus about monarchical limitations reinforces democratic values through objective analysis of past governmental failures. The genealogical societies that trace connections to royal servants and minor nobility pursue historical research rather than political objectives, as their morning meetings focus on family history, while afternoon publications document social relationships without advocating aristocratic privilege. The evening gatherings celebrate cultural heritage while acknowledging democratic equality that makes hereditary distinction irrelevant to contemporary society. Their activities demonstrate healthy interest in personal history within Republican framework that honors past without seeking restoration. The philosophical legacy of Bourbon absolute monarchy continues to influence political theory through negative example that demonstrates dangers of concentrated power, as university courses examine royal government's evolution toward crisis that revolutionary forces ultimately resolved through democratic innovation. The morning lectures analyze governmental structure, while afternoon seminars discuss alternative political arrangements that might have prevented revolutionary violence without sacrificing popular sovereignty. The evening discussions contribute to democratic theory through historical understanding of monarchical failure. Thus concludes the remarkable journey of the Bourbon Dynasty from Henri IV's conversion that established their legitimacy through Louis XVI's execution that ended their political authority. Their story encompasses nearly 3 centuries of absolute monarchy that shaped European civilization, while ultimately succumbing to democratic forces that proved stronger than divine right theory or military power. The daily routines of kings and queens, ministers and courtiers reveal both magnificent achievements and fatal limitations of personal rule, that historical development has permanently superseded through institutional democracy that honors human dignity while maintaining governmental effectiveness that absolute monarchy could never sustain against popular resistance and intellectual progress that characterize modern political consciousness. The morning mist that rises from the Seine on July 16th, 1815, carries with it the dreams of a dynasty that once ruled the greatest empire in Europe. In the modest rooms of Hartwell House in Buckinghamshire, an elderly man in simple black clothing awakens to news that will restore him to a throne he thought lost forever. Louis XVIII's breakfast consists of plain bread and tea, a stark contrast to the elaborate morning ceremonies his ancestors had commanded at Versailles. Yet his hands tremble slightly as he reads dispatches confirming Napoleon's final defeat at Waterloo. The king's morning routine during his English exile had been deliberately humble, designed to demonstrate royal acceptance of divine will, while maintaining dignity appropriate to legitimate monarchy temporarily displaced by usurpation. His daily walks through English gardens had provided meditation time, where he pondered the lessons of revolutionary excess and imperial adventure that had cost France so dearly in blood and treasure. The afternoon hours spent in his modest study, surrounded by books rather than courtiers, had given him perspective on kingship that his predecessors never possessed through direct experience of powerlessness and dependence on foreign charity. The restoration journey from London to Paris unfolds through stages that reveal both popular exhaustion with political upheaval and persistent uncertainty about monarchical legitimacy in post-revolutionary society. Louis XVIII's morning departure from Hartwell attracts crowds of English well-wishers who admire his patient dignity during years of exile, while afternoon stops at French cities provide mixed receptions from populations unsure whether royal return represents liberation or regression toward discredited absolute monarchy. His evening conversations with accompanying ministers focus on delicate balance required between royal authority and constitutional limitation that revolutionary experience has made politically necessary. The king's first morning back at the Tuileries Palace reveals physical decay that mirrors France's exhaustion after 25 years of revolutionary and imperial government, as apartments stripped of royal furnishing require complete restoration, while servants struggle to recreate ceremonial protocols that had been abandoned during Republican interlude. His breakfast table, once surrounded by competing courtiers, now hosts cautious ministers who understand that effective governance requires accommodation with democratic expectations, rather than simple restoration of pre-revolutionary practices that had proven politically unsustainable. The constitutional charter that Louis XVIII grants in June 1814 represents unprecedented royal acknowledgement of popular sovereignty, as morning council meetings now include elected representatives whose authority derives from constitutional mandate rather than royal appointment. His afternoon audiences with parliamentary delegations require diplomatic skills that absolute monarchs never needed, as he must balance traditional royal prerogatives with democratic accountability that limits monarchical initiative while preserving ceremonial functions essential for institutional legitimacy. The daily administration of constitutional monarchy demands new skills from royal bureaucracy accustomed to implementing royal commands rather than negotiating with independent legislative authority that can reject governmental proposals through majority vote. The King's morning briefings now include parliamentary schedules and opposition criticism that influence policy formation, while afternoon meetings with party leaders require royal flexibility about ministerial appointments that must satisfy elected representatives, rather than court favourites who had dominated previous administrative arrangements. Louis XVIII's physical limitations become increasingly apparent as gout and other ailments restrict his mobility, while political responsibilities require constant attention to constitutional relationships that absolute monarchy had never confronted. His morning medical consultations with royal physicians alternate with political briefings that reveal growing tensions between ultra-royalist supporters seeking restoration of traditional authority and liberal opposition, demanding expansion of democratic participation in governmental decisions. The King's efforts to maintain royal dignity within constitutional framework create daily contradictions between ceremonial requirements that emphasize royal supremacy and practical necessities that acknowledge parliamentary authority over policy formation and ministerial responsibility. His afternoon receptions at the Tuileries attempt to recreate court grandeur while operating within financial constraints imposed by legislative control over royal expenditure that previous kings had determined through personal discretion. The emergence of ultra-royalist opposition to constitutional monarchy reveals persistent aristocratic hostility toward democratic compromise that threatens royal legitimacy from unexpected direction, as extreme supporters demand restoration of absolute authority that would inevitably trigger renewed revolutionary resistance. Louis XVIII's evening consultations with moderate advisers focus on preventing ultra-royalist pressure from undermining constitutional settlement that provides only viable foundation for monarchical survival in post-revolutionary political environment. The White Terror that erupts in southern France during 1815 demonstrates ultra-royalist determination to reverse revolutionary changes through violent suppression of Republican sympathizers, creating governmental crisis that tests royal commitment to constitutional principles against pressure from extreme supporters seeking revenge for revolutionary persecution of aristocratic families. The King's daily efforts to control vigilante violence reveal tension between royal authority and factional loyalty that threatens constitutional monarchy from within royalist movement itself. The assassination of the Duc de Berry in February 1820 provides ultra-royalists with justification for demanding repressive measures that violate constitutional principles while creating succession crisis that threatens Bourbon continuity through elimination of direct male heir to throne. Louis XVIII's morning reaction to news of his nephew's murder reveals personal grief combined with political calculation about implications for dynastic survival, while afternoon emergency sessions with ministers focus on preventing ultra-royalist exploitation of tragedy to undermine constitutional government. The birth of the Duc de Bordeaux later that year provides Bourbon dynasty with posthumous heir, whose existence ensures succession continuity while creating new focus for ultra-royalist hopes about eventual restoration of absolute monarchy through future generation educated according to traditional principles rather than constitutional compromise. The King's daily visits to royal nursery reveal genuine affection for miraculous heir, while understanding that Charles' political education must balance royal tradition with constitutional necessity that makes absolute rule impossible. The final years of Louis XVIII's reign unfold in shadow of growing ultra-royalist influence that threatens constitutional settlement through systematic opposition to democratic institutions and liberal policies that had enabled peaceful royal restoration. His morning councils increasingly focus on managing conservative pressure while maintaining parliamentary support necessary for governmental effectiveness, as ultra-royalist demands for traditional authority conflict with constitutional requirements that limit royal power within democratic framework. The king's declining health during 1823 to 24 creates additional uncertainty about succession arrangements, as his brother Charles displays ultra-royalist sympathies that threaten constitutional monarchy through potential restoration of absolute authority that would inevitably provoke renewed democratic resistance. His afternoon meetings with Charles combine fraternal affection with political instruction about necessity for constitutional compromise, though conversations reveal fundamental disagreement about appropriate relationship between royal authority and popular sovereignty that constitutional monarchy requires. Louis XVIII's death in September 1824 removes moderating influence that had enabled constitutional monarchy to survive initial restoration period, as Charles X's succession brings committed ultra-royalists to throne with determination to restore traditional authority regardless of democratic opposition that such policies would certainly generate. The elaborate funeral ceremonies at Saint-Denis honor deceased king's success in re-establishing Bourbon legitimacy while creating apprehension about future political direction under successor whose political philosophy threatens constitutional settlement. The coronation of Charles VI at Reims Cathedral in May 1825 reveals new king's determination to restore traditional monarchy through ceremonial emphasis on divine right theory and religious authority that constitutional charter had limited through democratic provisions. His morning preparation for ancient ritual demonstrates commitment to absolute monarchy that ignores political realities created by revolutionary transformation of French consciousness, while afternoon celebrations attract ultra-royalist supporters who interpret royal determination as promise for systematic reversal of constitutional limitations. The daily routine that Charles VI establishes at the Tuileries consciously evokes pre-revolutionary court ceremonies, while rejecting constitutional constraints that his predecessor had accepted as necessary for monarchical survival in democratic age. His morning lever recreates elaborate protocols that emphasize royal supremacy over ministerial authority, while afternoon audiences demonstrate preference for ultra-royalist advisors, whose political philosophy threatens parliamentary government through systematic opposition to democratic institutions and liberal policies. The compensation law for emigrant nobles represents Charles VI's most controversial attempt to reverse revolutionary property transfers through governmental expenditure that benefits aristocratic families at expense of current landowners who had purchased confiscated estates through legal procedures. His daily involvement in legislative strategy reveals determination to restore traditional social hierarchy, despite parliamentary opposition that views compensation as unjust taxation for benefit of privileged class that had opposed revolutionary government. The press censorship laws imposed during 1827 demonstrate royal hostility toward democratic discourse that criticizes governmental policies or questions monarchical authority through independent journalism that constitutional charter had supposedly protected. The King's morning reviews of newspaper content reveal obsession with controlling public opinion, while afternoon meetings with censorship officials create administrative machinery for suppressing criticism that threatens royal authority through informed discussion of governmental failures and alternative political arrangements. The dissolution of Parliament in 1830, following electoral victories by liberal opposition, reveals Charles VI's determination to govern without democratic consent rather than accepting constitutional limitations on royal authority that parliamentary majority would impose through legislative control over policy formation. His morning decision to override electoral results demonstrates fundamental misunderstanding of democratic legitimacy while afternoon preparations for authoritarian rule ignore popular resistance that such policies would inevitably generate throughout France. The July ordinances issued on July 25, 1830, represent Charles VI's final attempt to destroy constitutional monarchy through suspension of democratic institutions and restoration of absolute authority backed by military force rather than popular consent. His morning signature on these revolutionary decrees reveals complete break with constitutional settlement, while afternoon preparations for enforcement demonstrate confidence in royal authority that ignores democratic strength that revolutionary period had created among French population. The 3 glorious days of revolution that begin on July 27th demonstrate popular determination to defend constitutional government against royal attempt to restore absolute monarchy through authoritarian coup that violates fundamental principles of democratic legitimacy. Charles IX's morning reports about Parisian uprising reveal bewilderment about popular resistance, while afternoon military consultations demonstrate royal inability to comprehend democratic forces that prove stronger than traditional authority backed by military force and religious sanction. The king's abdication on August 2, 1830, marks final defeat of Bourbon attempt to restore absolute monarchy as popular revolution establishes alternative governmental arrangements that preserve monarchical institution while ensuring democratic control over royal authority. His morning departure from Saint-Cloud Palace reveals personal dignity maintained despite political catastrophe, while afternoon journey toward English exile demonstrates aristocratic inability to understand democratic transformation that makes absolute rule permanently impossible in modern European society. The July monarchy, established under Louis-Philippe d'Orléans, creates new constitutional arrangement that preserves royal institution while acknowledging popular sovereignty through expanded suffrage and parliamentary supremacy that prevents any future restoration of absolute authority. The new king's morning routine at Tuileries Palace demonstrates bourgeois simplicity that contrasts sharply with Bourbon grandeur, while maintaining essential royal functions within democratic framework that satisfies middle-class expectations about governmental accountability and fiscal responsibility. Louis-Philippe's daily schedule reflects understanding that constitutional monarchy requires constant attention to popular opinion through accessible leadership style that previous Bourbon kings had never needed to maintain. His morning walks through Paris streets without elaborate security reveal confidence in bourgeois support, while afternoon business meetings with manufacturers and financiers demonstrate royal commitment to commercial development that benefits entire society rather than court elite that had dominated previous royal policy formation. The February Revolution of 1848 that destroys July monarchy provides final demonstration that French society will no longer tolerate any form of monarchical government, regardless of constitutional limitations or democratic procedures that preserve royal institution within republican framework. Louis-Philippe's morning abdication reveals understanding that popular forces have permanently rejected hereditary authority, while afternoon establishment of Second Republic marks definitive triumph of democratic principles over monarchical tradition that had governed France for over 8 centuries. The brief restoration attempt during the 1870s reveals persistent emotional attachment to Bourbon legitimacy among rural populations that remember pre-revolutionary society, though practical impossibility of re-establishing monarchical government in democratic age makes such efforts purely symbolic rather than politically viable. The Count de Chambord's morning audiences with royalist supporters in Austrian exile reflect nostalgic attachment to absolute monarchy, while afternoon discussions about restoration terms demonstrate fundamental misunderstanding of democratic expectations that make constitutional compromise inadequate for legitimist principles. The Third Republic's establishment provides permanent resolution to constitutional questions that had plagued France since 1789, as republican institutions achieve stability that monarchical restoration can never again threaten through popular appeal or foreign intervention. The daily routine at Élysée Palace creates democratic traditions that honor national dignity through constitutional rather than hereditary authority. while afternoon legislative sessions demonstrate popular sovereignty through representatives chosen by universal suffrage rather than royal appointment that had characterized previous political systems. The industrial transformation of France during late 19th century creates social conditions that make monarchical restoration impossible regardless of legitimist sentiment, as factory workers and urban professionals develop political consciousness based on economic interest rather than traditional loyalty to hereditary authority. The daily routine of modern society bypasses aristocratic intermediaries while generating democratic expectations that monarchical government could never satisfy without revolutionary resistance that would destroy political stability essential for economic development. The final Bourbon pretender lives quietly in private exile, where daily routine reflects acceptance of political irrelevance while maintaining personal dignity through adherence to royal protocol that serves psychological rather than political functions in republican society that has permanently moved beyond hereditary government toward democratic institutions that prove more adaptable to changing social and economic conditions than absolute monarchy could ever provide, through personal rule dependent on individual character rather than institutional effectiveness. The modern descendants of the House of Bourbon continue their quiet existence across Europe, their morning routines stripped of the ceremonial grandeur that once defined royal awakening at Versailles. In modest apartments in Paris and country estates in Spain, elderly men and women who carry the bloodline of Louis XIV rise to read newspapers that chronicle republican governments ruling territories their ancestors once commanded through divine right. Their breakfast conversations focus on family genealogy and charitable foundations rather than affairs of state, while afternoon walks through public parks replace the elaborate progresses that had once demonstrated royal authority to awestruck subjects. The preservation societies that maintain Bourbon historical sites conduct their daily operations with scholarly precision rather than political purpose, as morning staff meetings at Versailles focus on tourist management and conservation projects, while afternoon guided tours educate visitors about absolute monarchy's evolution and decline. The evening lectures delivered by professional historians analyze royal governmental systems for academic audiences who appreciate architectural magnificence and cultural achievement without political nostalgia that might suggest contemporary relevance for hereditary rule. The auction houses of Paris occasionally offer royal artifacts that escaped revolutionary destruction, their morning cataloguing sessions revealing intimate details about daily life at Bourbon courts, while afternoon bidding attracts collectors who value historical significance rather than legitimist symbolism. The evening receptions following these sales bring together enthusiasts who discuss royal craftsmanship and artistic patronage within commercial framework that transforms dynastic heritage into profitable cultural commodities serving educational rather than political purposes. The diplomatic archives that preserve Bourbon correspondence provide scholars with unprecedented access to royal decision-making processes, as morning research sessions in climate-controlled reading rooms reveal private thoughts of absolute monarchs, while afternoon transcription projects make historical documents available to democratic societies that can study royal government without fear of political restoration. The evening conferences where historians present their findings contribute to academic understanding of governmental evolution while reinforcing democratic values through objective analysis of monarchical limitations. The genealogical websites that trace royal bloodlines attract amateur historians whose morning searches through digitized records connect distant relatives to Bourbon heritage, while afternoon family reunions celebrate shared ancestry without political implications for contemporary society. The evening publications by family history societies document social relationships that once determined political advancement while acknowledging democratic equality that makes hereditary distinction irrelevant to modern professional success or social status. The luxury hotels that operate in former royal residences provide guests with opportunities to experience aristocratic lifestyle within commercial framework that serves tourism rather than political restoration. As morning check-in procedures at converted chateaux emphasize historical atmosphere, while afternoon amenities offer contemporary comfort that surpasses anything absolute monarchs ever enjoyed, despite their unlimited authority over French resources. The evening dining experiences in former royal apartments demonstrate cultural continuity within Republican context that honors artistic heritage without political nostalgia. The television documentaries that regularly examine Bourbon history attract international audiences whose morning viewing reflects fascination with individual personalities rather than governmental systems, while afternoon social media discussions analyze royal marriages and court scandals for entertainment rather than political instruction. The evening streaming services that offer historical dramas about absolute monarchy provide popular culture with romantic narratives that explore human drama while avoiding endorsement of hierarchical government that democratic audiences would reject as incompatible with contemporary values. The university courses that study Bourbon administration train students in historical methodology rather than political advocacy, as morning seminars examine administrative documents while afternoon fieldwork at archaeological sites reveals material culture that illuminates daily life under absolute monarchy. The evening thesis defenses by graduate students contribute to scholarly literature while demonstrating academic freedom that royal censorship would never have permitted during periods when governmental criticism could result in imprisonment or execution. The cultural festivals that celebrate French heritage incorporate royal traditions into Republican celebrations that honor historical continuity while emphasizing democratic progress, as morning parade preparations combine ceremonial elements with contemporary political themes, while afternoon performances in public squares demonstrate popular participation that absolute monarchy had never encouraged through fear of democratic organization. The evening fireworks displays commemorate national achievements that transcend dynastic accomplishments through collective rather than royal initiative. The restoration workshops that maintain Bourbon artworks employ traditional techniques within institutional frameworks that serve public rather than royal purposes. As morning conservation sessions preserve cultural heritage, while afternoon educational programs train new generations of craftspeople whose skills honor artistic tradition without aristocratic context. The evening exhibitions of completed projects demonstrate continued vitality of French cultural achievement within democratic society that appreciates beauty without requiring royal patronage for artistic development. The international conferences that examine European monarchy bring together scholars whose morning presentations compare different royal systems, while afternoon discussions analyze factors that enabled some monarchies to survive democratic transition, while others succumbed to revolutionary pressure. The evening receptions at these academic gatherings demonstrate scholarly collaboration that transcends national boundaries through intellectual exchange, rather than dynastic marriage or territorial conquest that had characterized royal diplomacy. The memorial services held annually at royal burial sites attract descendants and historians whose morning ceremonies honor individual achievement, while afternoon discussions focus on historical significance rather than political restoration, as Republican government maintains cultural sites that commemorate past, without suggesting future relevance for hereditary authority. The evening receptions following these commemorations celebrate scholarly research and cultural preservation within democratic framework that protects historical memory while preventing political exploitation. The language preservation societies that maintain classical French work to protect linguistic heritage associated with royal courts, as morning translation projects make historical documents accessible to contemporary readers, while afternoon instruction in archaic vocabulary serves academic rather than political purposes. The evening poetry readings that feature royal-era literature demonstrate cultural continuity within Republican context that honors artistic achievement while rejecting political philosophy that justified absolute authority through divine sanction. The architectural conservation programs that preserve royal buildings employ modern techniques to maintain structural integrity while adapting historical spaces for contemporary educational and cultural functions. as morning engineering assessments ensure visitor safety, while afternoon public tours generate revenue that supports preservation without political strings. The evening concerts held in former royal chambers demonstrate continued aesthetic value within democratic context that appreciates artistic heritage without aristocratic privilege. The psychological studies that examine royal family dynamics provide insights into human behavior under extreme pressure, while contributing to understanding of leadership challenges that transcend political systems, as morning interviews with royal descendants reveal personal rather than political perspectives, while afternoon analysis focuses on family relationships rather than governmental structures. The evening publications in academic journals contribute to behavioral science without political advocacy for hereditary authority that psychological research would never support, given evidence about democratic leadership effectiveness. The technological innovations that digitize royal archives make historical documents globally accessible through internet platforms that serve educational rather than political purposes, as morning scanning sessions preserve fragile manuscripts, while afternoon database development creates research tools that democratize access to information that royal governments had restricted to privileged elites. The evening online conferences bring together international researchers whose collaboration transcends national boundaries through scholarly exchange rather than diplomatic protocol. The environmental conservation projects at former royal estates demonstrate ecological rather than political values, as morning wildlife surveys in palace gardens contribute to biodiversity research, while afternoon habitat restoration serves scientific rather than aristocratic purposes. The evening educational programs about sustainable land management honor environmental stewardship that transcends political systems through recognition that natural heritage belongs to entire human community rather than hereditary owners who had claimed divine authorization for territorial control. The music preservation societies that maintain royal musical traditions focus on artistic rather than political heritage, as morning rehearsals of court compositions serve aesthetic rather than ceremonial purposes, while afternoon concerts in former royal venues demonstrate cultural continuity within democratic framework. The evening recordings that preserve these musical traditions contribute to global cultural heritage while rejecting political philosophy that had justified absolute monarchy through claims about divine inspiration for royal artistic patronage. Thus, the final echoes of Bourbon grandeur fade into the gentle rhythms of democratic society, where former subjects have become citizens and royal palaces have become museums that serve educational rather than political purposes. The daily routines that once revolved around royal authority now operate through institutional frameworks that honor cultural achievement while rejecting hereditary privilege, as modern France demonstrates that human dignity and national greatness can flourish more effectively through democratic participation than through absolute monarchy that had concentrated power in individual hands rather than collective wisdom that characterizes contemporary governmental success. And so our gentle journey through the corridors of time draws to a peaceful close, as the morning light that once illuminated the magnificent chambers of Versailles now streams through the windows of museums and monuments that preserve the memory of France's last kings. The Bourbon Dynasty, which began with Henri IV's pragmatic conversion in a candlelit cathedral, and ended with the quiet dignity of exiled pretenders reading newspapers in modest apartments, reminds us that even the most absolute power must ultimately yield to the inexorable march of human progress toward greater freedom and dignity for all. Tonight, we have walked alongside these remarkable monarchs through their daily routines of triumph and tragedy, witnessing how the simple acts of rising each morning, breaking bread, and governing a kingdom revealed both the magnificent achievements and fatal limitations of hereditary rule. From Henri's informal accessibility to Louis XIV's choreographed grandeur, from Louis XVI's well-intentioned fumbling to the constitutional compromises of Restoration kings, we have seen how individual character and historical circumstance combine to shape the destiny of Europe's most powerful dynasty. The palaces where they once held court now welcome millions of visitors who come not as subjects seeking royal favor, but as free citizens exploring their cultural heritage. The gardens where absolute monarchs once walked in splendid isolation have become public spaces where children play and lovers stroll, while the great halls that echoed with ceremonial deference now host educational programs that teach democratic values through the cautionary tale of concentrated power. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you might imagine those empty royal apartments at Versailles, where moonlight falls upon rooms that once witnessed history's most dramatic moments. The silence that now fills these spaces speaks not of endings, but of transformation, reminding us that while dynasties may fall and empires may crumble, the human spirit's yearning for justice and dignity endures forever. Rest well, knowing that the lessons of the past illuminate the path toward a more enlightened future.